What if the most powerful man on earth once bottled cologne he never wore, ate Big Macs from a gold-plated tower, and summoned soda with a red button on the nuclear desk? This isn't satire. It's not a sketch. It's the real, bizarre, almost mythic life of Donald Trump told through strange, overlooked facts you'll never unhear. From modeling agencies to military school, stakes to sitcoms, buckle up for a ride through ego, empire, and everything in between. These are Donald Trump facts to fall asleep to. But don't worry, sleep comes later. First, let's get weird. Teetotaler, by choice. Donald Trump does not drink alcohol. Never has. Not a drop, not a toast, not a sip. In a world of swirling glasses and clinking flutes, the man has opted out entirely. That might seem like a minor footnote in a life dominated by skyscrapers, lawsuits, and campaign trails, but it's more than a quirk. It's a deliberate choice, rooted in something dark, something formative. The story begins not with him, but with his older brother Fred Trump Jr., known as Freddie. By all accounts, Fred Jr. was charismatic, affable, and strikingly different from his younger sibling. Where Donald was business-focused and brash, Fred wanted to fly planes. He trained as a pilot, charmed everyone in a room, and had a laugh you could hear across the yard. He was the one people liked. But Fred was also fighting a quiet war with addiction. Alcoholism took hold slowly, then all at once. It ruined his career, strained his relationships, and, in 1981, ended his life at just 43. Donald was 35 when his brother died, and he never forgot it. In interviews, he has spoken of that moment with uncharacteristic solemnity. "I watched what alcohol did to him," he said, "and I learned from it." That statement, simple and cold, is more telling than it seems. Because in the rare moments Donald Trump expresses personal vulnerability, it's almost always tied back to control, mastery, dominance over weakness. So he swore off drinking. No wine at dinners, no champagne at weddings. He even avoids coffee. And in doing so, Trump carved out a rare identity among the American elite. A teetotaler by force of will, not faith, no religious zeal, no dietary doctrine. Just a personal vendetta against the bottle, born from grief. It's a choice that has followed him into every facet of his life. When he launched Trump Vodka in 2000 and Sixtigline, Success Distilled, he famously admitted he'd never tasted the product. The brand, like many Trump ventures, was a marketing experiment wrapped in luxury aesthetics. Gold-accented bottles, advertisements featuring crystal tumblers and limousines, and a confident pitch, a vodka worthy of the Trump name. But behind the scenes, the man selling the drink had never touched the stuff. To him, it was just another brand to push detached, clinical, ironic. Trump Vodka fizzled out by 2011, but the image stuck. Trump, the non-drinking mogul who nevertheless sold indulgence like it was oxygen. And it didn't stop with vodka. The Trump lifestyle brand was built on images of power, gold elevators, marbled penthouses, steak dinners, cigars, scotch, all the visual cues of high-stakes masculinity. But the man behind the curtain didn't partake in the vices he sold. No bourbon-soaked nights, no cigars on balconies. His image was decadent, but his habits were clinical, calculated, almost monkish. Even during his time in the White House, an environment known for its evening soirees and ceremonial toasts, Trump stayed dry. State dinners were navigated without wine. Foreign leaders raised glasses of vintage reds, while Trump stuck to Diet Coke, delivered by a red button on the resolute desk. Yes, there really was a Diet Coke button. And it wasn't just preference. Trump's sobriety was tactical, controlled. In his world, intoxication equals vulnerability, and vulnerability is weakness. Drinking, to him, isn't just a bad habit, it's a crack in the armor. He's mentioned this belief repeatedly, sometimes in blunt terms. "I just don't like the idea of being out of control," he said. And in that, we find the core of the man, not the real estate tycoon, not the reality TV boss, not the politician, but the control freak, the man who builds castles in the air and dares you to question the foundation, the man who witnessed his brother's life unravel and decided, with characteristic finality, that will not be me. It's worth noting that Trump's teetotalism hasn't made him preachy. He doesn't scold others for drinking. He doesn't moralize. He just abstains. Quietly, relentlessly, even when marketing liquor, even when partying with models, even when mingling with billionaires whose wine cellars could fill museums. But of course, in the Trump universe, every fact spins into contradiction. While he avoids alcohol, he's surrounded himself with the trappings of intoxication. High-stakes casinos, champagne fountains, clubs that pulse till sunrise. The environments he creates are drunk on decadence. It's like designing a chocolate factory when you hate sugar. But then again, Trump has never needed to taste the product to sell it. He just needs to know you want it. And maybe that's the real takeaway. His sobriety isn't a moral stand. It's a power move. He doesn't need the drink. He doesn't want the drink. He is the drink. So the next time you imagine Donald Trump at one of his gold-drenched galas, surrounded by sycophants with martinis and Manhattans, just picture this. Him, stone-cold sober, Diet Coke in hand, scanning the room like a hawk in a velvet cage. Because the most powerful man in the room is the one who's in control. And speaking of control, let's talk about the time he tried to control your family game night with a little something called Trump, the Game. Board game creator. In 1989, Donald Trump released a board game. Not just any board game. This one had his name plastered across the top in metallic gold, his face looming on the box like a Bond villain's cousin who majored in real estate. The title, Trump, the Game, not Monopoly, not Risk. Trump, the Game. Let's pause for a moment and unpack that. A man who had already cemented himself in the skyline of New York decided that he should also occupy your kitchen table. He wasn't just building towers anymore, he was building mechanics, strategies, paper money. He was entering your home, not through a skyscraper lobby, but through Parker Brothers logic. The game was, in many ways, a reflection of the man himself. Loud, complicated, swaggering with confidence. It promised ruthless deal-making, cutthroat auctions, high-stakes gambits. The box literally taunted players with the tagline, "It's not whether you win or lose, but whether you win." Subtlety was not on the menu. Released at the peak of Trump's 1980s fame back when he was more mascot than mogul Trump, the game was supposed to be the next big thing in competitive tabletop capitalism. It came with custom play money printed with Trump's face, gold-trimmed property cards, and a rulebook that might as well have come with a legal team. The game's mechanics? Think Monopoly on a caffeine high, with more aggressive bidding, fewer scruples, and a ruthless drive to bankrupt your opponents as fast as possible. If Monopoly ends friendships, Trump, the Game, annihilated them and then sent a follow-up letter saying it was just business. There was even a commercial. Trump, suited and severe, stared into the camera like a man proposing marriage and issuing a lawsuit simultaneously. "I'm back, and you're gonna be in trouble," he declared, sounding more like a Bond villain than a game night ambassador. He smirked, crossed his arms, and finished with, "I play to win." The ad didn't explain the rules. It didn't need to. The real pitch was ego, pure, unfiltered bravado. But here's the kicker. The game flopped. Badly. Despite the marketing blitz and the Trump brand being white hot, the game sold poorly only 800, 0 copies of the 2 million printed were ever sold. It disappeared from shelves faster than it arrived. Why? The rules were confusing. The gameplay was clunky. And most critically, the audience just didn't buy into the idea of playing a Trump-themed capitalist deathmatch when they could just, play Monopoly. The critics weren't kind either. Reviews at the time called it overly complicated, a vanity project, and less fun than watching paint dry on a gold lame wall. Okay, maybe that last one is apocryphal, but the sentiment was clear. It was a branding exercise disguised as entertainment. And yet, Trump never fully let go of the idea. In 2004, when The Apprentice was burning up television ratings and he was back in the cultural spotlight, he tried again. Parker Brothers re-released the game with a tie-in to the show. The rules were streamlined. The branding leaned into the "you're fired" catchphrase. The packaging was sleeker, meaner, more television-friendly. Trump once again became the centerpiece, towering over the board like a capitalist demigod. This version didn't fare much better. It sold some units, capitalizing on the show's popularity, but never entered the pantheon of classic games. It wasn't something people played regularly. It wasn't fun. It was more like a relic, a novelty, something you bought because you saw it on TV and thought, well, this will be weird. Which, in many ways, was the point. Trump. The game wasn't about gameplay. It wasn't about winning or losing or dice rolls or strategies. It was about him. It was about the idea of Trump, commodified, shrink-wrapped, and placed on a shelf next to Saurian Clue. It was another vertical in the Trump empire, not a business venture, but a branding vessel. It said, "This man's ego is so enormous, it has its own game mechanics." And in that context, the failure didn't matter. Because failure, to Trump, is always negotiable. In his mind, Trump, the game, wasn't a flop. It was an idea ahead of its time. A misunderstood gem. A collector's item. He said as much. In his books and interviews, he spins the board game not as a misfire, but as a blip, something that didn't land because the public wasn't ready for it. But here's where things get interesting. Despite its commercial failure, the game has become a kind of cult object. Copies still circulate on eBay. Enthusiasts dissect it on YouTube. Some people even host ironic Trump game nights, complete with red ties and bad impersonations. It lives on, not because it was good, but because it was bizarre. A time capsule of 1,980's excess and ego. And perhaps that's the real value of Trump, the game. Not as a game, but as an artifact. A cardboard portal into a very specific cultural moment when a real estate mogul decided he wanted to be Milton Bradley for one summer. It tells you everything you need to know about the man's brand strategy. Slap the name on it, make it gold, sell it as success. If it works, great. If it flops, rebrand it, re-release it, rewrite the story. Because to Donald Trump, every endeavor is a form of storytelling. Every product is a mirror reflecting back the myth he's been building since he was a kid, sneaking into his father's construction meetings. And if you think branding a board game was bold, just wait until we get into his years as the pageant king of the world. Miss Universe, Miss USA, Miss Teen USA, beauty, business, and controversy, all parading under one very shiny banner. Miss Universe ownership. In 1996, Donald Trump bought the Miss Universe organization. That meant he wasn't just the face of the show, he owned the crown, the stage, the lights, and the long, awkward question and answer segments. For nearly 2 decades, Trump ran the Miss Universe, Miss USA, and Miss Teen USA pageants like beauty was a business, and to him, it was. The move wasn't random. Trump had been circling the world of televised spectacle for years. From WrestleMania to late-night cameos. Pageants offered him something different. A global spotlight wrapped in sequins and PR. He didn't just want viewers. He wanted attention from every continent with a satellite dish. Under his ownership, the pageants became louder, glossier, and more Trumpian. They often aired from his own properties, Trump casinos in Atlantic City, Trump hotels in Vegas. If a camera was rolling, it was probably pointed at something he branded. The man didn't miss an opportunity to turn glamour into marketing. Trump made himself the centerpiece of the show. He was the judge, the host. The owner role rolled into one omnipresent tuxedo. Contestants recalled him walking backstage, sometimes unexpectedly. He would do walkthroughs like a CEO inspecting inventory. It was his empire, after all. But the glitz came with controversy. Stories began to emerge. Some former contestants spoke about unsettling encounters, including Trump entering dressing rooms unannounced. In interviews, Trump himself once boasted about having access to the backstage areas. The man never saw boundaries as something sacred. In his world, ownership meant access. Still, he expanded the pageant's global reach. Miss Universe, in particular, became a televised export, drawing massive international audiences. And for Trump, international recognition wasn't just a bonus, it was a strategic tool. He'd sit courtside at the events, surrounded by celebrities, waving to cameras like a head of state in exile. Owning the pageants also fed directly into Trump's preferred image of himself, the ultimate judge, the man who decides who wins, who makes it, who gets the crown. It played into the mythology he'd been building since the 80s, that of the all-seeing businessman, the one man whose approval was worth more than anyone else's. But by 2015, the crown was tarnished. During his first presidential campaign, Trump made inflammatory remarks about immigrants. In response, Univision and NBC cut ties with the Miss Universe organization. Multiple co-hosts, judges, and sponsors withdrew. The backlash was swift and expensive. Facing financial and reputational pressure, Trump sold the pageants to WME-IMG. Just a few days after filing a $500 million lawsuit against Univision, which he later dropped, he exited the world of tiaras and sashes entirely. The Trump era of Miss Universe was over. But it left behind something bigger than a show. It left a blueprint of how he saw the world. As a competition with winners and losers, scored on appearance, charm, and the ability to play the game. And in Trump's game, the rules always bent toward the owner. He no longer crowns Miss Universe. But don't worry, he had something even shinier lined up. Cue the fireworks. Cue the music. Cue the red tie and the folding chair, because next, he took that same sense of spectacle and marched straight into the squared circle of professional wrestling. WWE Hall of Fame inductee. In 2013, Donald Trump was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, Yes World Wrestling Entertainment. The same pantheon that enshrined Hulk Hogan, The Undertaker, and Stone Cold Steve Austin now included a real estate mogul turned reality TV star. If that sounds bizarre, it's because it is. But in the grand, chaotic opera of Trump's life, this chapter fits weirdly well. Trump's relationship with WWE goes back to the late 1980s. He hosted WrestleMania 4 and 5 at his Trump Plaza Hotel and Casino in Atlantic City. And when we say hosted, we mean he put his branding all over it. For Trump, it wasn't about the body slam sit. It was about spectacle, ratings, and the chance to have his name flashing in the background while men in spandex yelled into microphones. But the real climax came in 2007 during WrestleMania 23. The event was dubbed the Battle of the Billionaires. Trump faced off against WWE Chairman Vince McMahon in the ring, but as the managers of rival wrestlers, each billionaire picked a fighter. The loser would get his head shaved, live in the ring. It was ridiculous, It was dramatic. It was perfect. Trump's proxy, Bobby Lashley, faced off against McMahon's man, Umaga. With Stone Cold Steve Austin as the special guest referee, the match spiraled into the kind of over-the-top mayhem only pro wrestling can deliver. Trump got physical, tackling McMahon mid-match in a moment that's been replayed millions of times. The crowd erupted. Trump's guy won. And yes, McMahon's head was shaved bald in front of 80, zero screaming fans, and millions more at home. That single moment, Trump, grinning ear to ear as McMahon's hair hit the mat, was pure theater. A billionaire playing heel-turned hero. A master of media turning the wrestling ring into a PR coliseum. It wasn't politics. It wasn't business. It was performance art. And Trump, ever the showman, nailed his cues. His involvement wasn't just a cameo. It was a full arc. And WWE recognized that. In 2013, they inducted him into their Hall of Fame, just 1 year before he launched his first serious presidential flirtations. At the ceremony, McMahon introduced Trump as someone who had a great mind for business and knew how to make money wherever he went. The crowd was mixed, some cheers, some boos, but Trump, used to controversy, smiled through it. There's something fitting about this whole thing. Wrestling has always been part sport, part soap opera. It's a world where perception trumps reality, where the louder you are, the more you win. A place where charisma, ego, and bluster are currency. Sound familiar? Trump's time with WWE wasn't just a sideshow. It was training ground. It taught him how to command a crowd, how to play a persona, how to sell a storyline, even if it's absurd, especially if it's absurd. And perhaps, buried somewhere between the body slams and the promo reels, he realized something. If you can dominate the narrative in a wrestling ring, you can do it anywhere, even in politics, even on the biggest stage in the world. Because in wrestling, it doesn't matter if it's real. It only matters if it works. And speaking of working a crowd, next came his most enduring bit of pageantry. Not belts or sashes, but a literal star set in Hollywood concrete. Because if you thought WrestleMania was wild, just wait until we talk about the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Star on the Walk of Fame. There it is, gleaming from the sidewalk at 6,801 Hollywood Boulevard. 5 points. Terrazzo and brass. A name chiseled in for the world to step over, pose next to, or maybe stomp on if the mood hits. Donald Trump. Right there, immortalized on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. He received the star in 2007 not for politics, not for real estate, but for television. Specifically, for his role as the hard-nosed host of The Apprentice. Let's rewind. By the mid-2000s, Trump was in his second cultural renaissance. The real estate tycoon of the 80s had weathered bankruptcies and scandals and emerged slicker than ever as a TV boss handing out business verdicts like death sentences. "You're fired," he said. And America tuned in, week after week. The phrase became a national catchphrase. It was blunt. It was final. It was very, very Trump. The Apprentice wasn't just another reality show. It was image rehab through entertainment. Trump's name was the title. His office was the set. His empire was the prize. He played himself, but bigger. A caricature of a mogul with boardroom lighting and a soundtrack to match. And audiences loved it. NBC did too. The show brought in massive ratings, launched spin-offs, and helped re-cement Trump's image not just as a businessman, but as a symbol of American ambition, rugged, ruthless, gold-plated. This wasn't the guy with failed casinos. This was the guy with a jet, a penthouse, and a camera crew. And Hollywood noticed. So in 2007, they gave him a star. On-screen text, Donald J. Trump. Television. It was a strategic recognition. The Walk of Fame has never been about critical acclaim, it's about impact. And Trump, like him or not, was making waves. The ceremony was as grand as you'd expect. Trump smiled, posed, pointed at the ground like he was claiming land. He said something about success, something about television, and of course, something about how much he loved Hollywood. But the star, like the man, didn't stay quiet. Over the years, it became a symbol of adoration and protest. People posed with it, people defaced it. Someone even smashed it with a pickaxe twice. It was repaired each time, reinforced, guarded, and still, tourists flocked to it. Because, in a way, that star captured the paradox of Trump, a man who demanded recognition and got it. A man whose fame outpaced his credentials. A celebrity who became an institution, not for what he built, but for who he became on camera. And like all things Trump, it wasn't just about being there, it was about being everywhere. The star wasn't just sidewalk decoration, it was a declaration. Proof that he had conquered yet another arena. From skyscrapers to sound stages, from boardrooms to boulevards, every success, no matter how strange, was a step toward a bigger brand. And every plaque, every trophy, every star became another piece of armor in the persona he was constructing. But fame is fickle. What glitters today can be trampled tomorrow. And just like his star, Trump himself would soon find out what it meant to be both celebrated and vandalized at the same time. Because next, we're heading into a story where names weren't carved in stone, they were made up entirely. Let's talk about the time Donald Trump became someone else, or rather, several someone else's. Pseudonym user: John Barron, John Miller. These weren't business associates, they weren't lawyers or PR reps, they were Donald Trump. Or more accurately, voices Trump used to talk about himself disguised behind a telephone and a bad alias. It started in the 1980s, back when the tabloids were fueled by rumors and rotary phones, and New York was a jungle of flashing cameras and gossip columns. Trump was still rising, building his empire, flexing his muscles in the media, and trying to dominate every column inch of page 6, but instead of waiting for the press to call, he called them, pretending to be someone else. Enter John Barron. That name started popping up in newsrooms. He was introduced as a spokesman for Donald Trump, offering insider insights with suspiciously intimate detail. Mr. Trump's dating many women, Barron would say. Models, actresses, you know how it is. Or, Mr. Trump's very rich, more than anyone realizes. The voice, a little familiar. The tone, confident, smug, almost too on brand. Reporters quickly suspected what was going on. Some even flat out said it. We think that's Donald. But the calls kept coming. The stories kept printing. Because even if the ruse was transparent, the quotes were gold. They filled columns. They sold papers. Then came John Miller. Slightly different name, same shtick. This time, Miller called People magazine in 1990 OAT. 1. To discuss Trump's divorce and supposed romantic exploits with Madonna and Carla Bruni. It was like a one-man PR agency wearing a paper mustache, a bizarre mix of performance and manipulation. The magazine recorded the call, and decades later, when the tape resurfaced, it confirmed what most already knew: it was Trump. Same cadence, same phrasing, same Trumpisms. When confronted about it in later interviews, Trump denied it sort of. It doesn't sound like me, he said, even though it absolutely did. Why did he do it? Control. Trump has always seen the media as a battlefield. And if the reporters wouldn't write the narrative he wanted, he'd supply it himself. As Barron. As Miller. As a man behind the curtain pulling his own levers. There's also an odd irony to the names. John Barron became one of his go-to aliases for years. So much so, he even gave the name to his youngest son, Barron Trump. Whether that's coincidence or a legacy Easter egg, well, you decide. This practice wasn't illegal. It wasn't even all that rare among the New York elite back then, but Trump turned it into a weapon, a form of media judo. Why wait for good press when you can ghostwrite your own? It's fitting, really. Trump always saw reality as pliable. Names, facts, identities, they were just tools in a larger performance. What mattered wasn't truth. What mattered was what stuck. And these voices stuck. They live on in interviews, in old articles, in that raspy cadence whispering into phones about yachts and lovers and bank accounts. They were Trump's early experiments in branding, before the rallies, before the podiums, before the presidency. Because sometimes, the best way to control the spotlight is to talk to it yourself. And speaking of control, let's move from pseudonyms to paranoia, from disguises to disinfectant. Because next, we step into the germaphobic mind of a man who loves the deal, but loathes the handshake. Germaphobe tendencies. Donald Trump hates germs. He really, truly, deeply hates them. To the casual observer, it might seem like an odd quirk for someone who spent decades shaking hands, hugging donors, and navigating rooms packed with strangers. But to Trump, germophobia isn't just a preference, it's practically a doctrine, a belief system built around the sacred ritual of not touching things. He's spoken about it openly, time and again, in interviews, in books, on the campaign trail. He has described handshaking as barbaric. That's the word he uses, barbaric. A relic of social expectations he'd rather skip, but tolerates because, well, optics. He wrote in The Art of the Comeback, "One of the curses of American society is the simple act of shaking hands." And he wasn't joking. Trump believes that hands are germ superhighways, that you don't know where they've been, that they've touched door handles, subway poles, other people's noses. And he's not wrong, hands are gross, but Trump turns this into an art form of avoidance. Behind the scenes, his precautions were legendary. Aides carried hand sanitizer like secret agents with a nuclear football. Bottles were stashed in offices, cars, and backstage areas. After public events, he would discreetly, and sometimes not so discreetly, clean his hands like a surgeon prepping for a transplant. Even during televised appearances, he'd often pull out Purell between commercial breaks. One moment, he's glaring down a rival contestant on The Apprentice. The next, he's scrubbing invisible bacteria from his fingertips. His germophobia isn't confined to hands, either. Reports from staff and former employees have described his strict cleanliness preferences. He's known to dislike touching elevator buttons. He avoids shaking hands unless absolutely necessary. And he reportedly prefers fast food restaurants not because of the cuisine, but because he trusts the standardized cleanliness. In his logic, a McDonald's is safer than a gourmet kitchen because everything is pre-wrapped and handled by someone in gloves. When he entered the White House, the rituals continued. Visitors noticed, some even adapted. They'd nod instead of offering a handshake. Elbow bumps became acceptable years before a pandemic made them trendy. And yet, despite the aversiones out there, shaking hands with hundreds of people a day, gripping babies at rallies, grinning through awkward group photos. Why? Because image matters more than comfort. Trump has always understood the performance of leadership, the optics of confidence. He knows a handshake is a symbol, a transaction of power, so he does it. But you better believe he's reaching for sanitizer the second the cameras turn away. The paradox is fascinating. The man built an empire on the idea of connection deals, partnerships, hand-signed contracts. Yet, at the microbial level, he wants no part of that intimacy. Power, yes. Contact, no. He'll negotiate for billions, but flinch at a moist palm. And whether this trait is psychological, compulsive, or just strategic, it's part of the larger Trump design, Everything clean, everything controlled. No weakness, no mess, no infection. So next time you see him gripping a supporter's hand with that forced grimace, just remember there's probably a bottle of Purell just out of frame. And speaking of out of frame, let's follow Trump to the drive-thru. Because what do you eat when you're rich, famous, germaverse, and always on the move? Fast food. Lots and lots of fast food. Fast food enthusiast. Donald Trump loves fast food. Not in a guilty pleasure, treat yourself once a week kind of way. Noth is full commitment, a ritual, a preference, a portable golden-arched lifestyle. For a man with a private jet, a fleet of luxury properties, and a name synonymous with extravagance, his go-to meals are often wrapped in paper, boxed in styrofoam, and handed to him through a window. We're talking McDonald's, Wendy's, KFC, Burger King, Domino's. These are not fallback options, they're staples. Trump has openly praised fast food chains for years. Why? His reasoning is classic Trump: control and consistency. He once explained, "It's clean. I know what I'm getting." In Trump's world, those 2 points matter more than truffle oil or white tablecloths. He trusts the industrial, mass-produced reliability of fast food more than the unpredictability of a gourmet kitchen. He said he fears restaurant kitchens may not be sanitary or do things to his food. But a Big Mac? Factory-made, pre-packaged, regulated, safe. On the campaign trail in 2016, Trump's affinity for fast food became almost a mascot of its own. Journalists covering him were treated to catering trays of McDonald's and pizza. His team rolled into airports with bags of burgers. And of course, there's the now iconic photo. Trump aboard his private 757, red tie loosened, grinning beside a bucket of KFC and a copy of USA Today, silverware in hand. Because even when eating fried chicken, Trump brought his own rules. When he got to the White House, the habits didn't change. In fact, they got a spotlight. In January 2019, during a government shutdown, Trump famously hosted the Clemson Tigers football team with an all-fast food buffet. McDonald's, Wendy's, Burger King, and Domino's pizzas lined silver platters. Pyramids of burgers stacked like edible trophies. Great American food, he called it. I paid for it myself, he added. It was bizarre. It was meme-worthy. It was very, very Trump. People laughed. Critics scoffed. But to supporters, it was a symbol. The billionaire who dines like the everyman. The president who skips the filet mignon for a filet-o-fish. Whether genuine or performative, or a mix of both, it worked. It fed the narrative. Trump, the outsider, the non-politician, the guy who eats what you eat. But the menu goes deeper. His usual McDonald's order reportedly includes 2 Big Macs, 2 filet-o-fish, and a chocolate milkshake. That's around 400 calories in one sitting. He's also known to favor Diet Coke up to 12 cans a day, according to some insiders. In the White House, he even had a red button installed on his desk. Press it, and a butler would appear with a Diet Coke on a silver tray. Fast food, to Trump, is more than convenience. It's identity. It's part of the brand. Mass appeal, mass production, mass consumption. He's not chasing a Michelin star. He's ordering off the dollar menu with presidential confidence. And sure, nutritionists may recoil, but Trump isn't interested in wellness trends or superfoods. He's not blending kale. He's not snacking on almonds. He's doubling down on burgers and fries because it's familiar. It's American. It's unpretentious in a very performative way. So the next time you imagine the table of a billionaire, skip the caviar, picture a paper bag, picture cold fries, picture the president with a fast food feast laid out like a state dinner. And if you think that's surreal, just wait, because next, We trade the drive-through for the driving range. Trump doesn't just eat like the everyman, he plays like him, 218 holes at a time. Let's talk golf. Golf course designer. Donald Trump doesn't just play golf. He builds golf. He brands it. He turns it into an empire of manicured landscapes, opulent clubhouses, and scorecards that always seem to lean in his favor. Over the decades, Trump has turned his love for the sport into a sprawling international portfolio somewhere between a business venture, a personal playground, and a shrine to his own mythology. The Trump Organization owns or operates at least 17 golf courses worldwide, from the windswept dunes of Scotland to the palm-lined fairways of Florida. These aren't modest public greens. These are elite, members-only fortresses with towering clubhouses, gold-embossed logos, and suites that could house a small royal family. His courses include Trump National Doral in Miami, Trump Turnberry in Scotland, Trump International Golf Links in Ireland, and several others scattered across the US and abroad. But Trump doesn't just slap his name on a flag and call it a day. He's been personally involved in the design and promotion of many of these courses. He often consults with architects, approves landscaping decisions, and hovers over blueprints like a general planning a battlefield. In his own words, he's created some of the best golf experiences in the world. And while that may be subjective, there's no denying the scale and ambition behind his golf empire. Trump's obsession with golf goes far beyond casual weekend play. It's a lifestyle, a ritual, a performance. He reportedly plays several times a week, often with celebrities, politicians, and business titans. His swing has been analyzed, his clubs customized, his presence on the course always unmistakable. Red hat, white glove, sharp slacks. A man who plays every round like it's televised. He's even been accused of, shall we say, creative scoring? Multiple players and sports writers have alleged that Trump has a habit of improving lies, ignoring out-of-bounds shots, and generally bending the rules in his favor. One biographer dubbed him the commander-in-chief. Another described rounds where his caddy would quietly toss balls back onto the fairway. Trump denies these claims, of course, insisting he plays very good golf. And who's to argue? After all, he did once win a club championship without playing in the tournament. He simply declared himself the winner because, as he told the media, he played a better round earlier that week. It's funny, until it's not. Because to Trump, the golf course isn't just recreation, it's reputation. It's a metaphor. He talks about his courses the way a painter talks about a canvas. It's part of the image. Power, precision, perfection. Golf is where deals are struck, alliances formed, egos measured by handicaps. And in that world, Trump has declared himself king. Even during his presidency, golf never took a back seat. He visited his courses over 300 times while in office. Critics howled. Supporters shrugged. Trump? He kept swinging. And the legacy? Mixed. Some of his courses have won awards. Others have sparked environmental protests or local pushback. But, win or lose, Trump's tees are planted deep. His name is etched in marble above locker rooms. His logo is stitched into polos and visors. He's turned a sport of quiet dignity into another stage for his loud brand of dominance. Because for Trump, every hole is a headline, every round is a press release, and every course is a kingdom. But even monarchs like a little drama. So next, let's swap greens for rings. We're heading back into the absurd and theatrical because this man didn't just play golf. He also body-slammed billionaires at WrestleMania. Again, WrestleMania participant. Donald Trump didn't just get inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. He didn't just sit ringside or schmooze with wrestlers backstage. No, he entered the ring. He got in on the action, suited up in drama and chaos. In 2007, at WrestleMania 23, Trump became a full-blown character in one of the most surreal showdowns in sports entertainment, the Battle of the Billionaires. Here's how it went down. Vince McMahon, the WWE chairman and perennial bad guy of the ring, challenged Trump to a duel, not with fists, but with fighters. Each billionaire would pick a wrestler to represent them. The stakes? The losing billionaire would have his head shaved, live, in front of a roaring crowd at Detroit's Ford Field and millions watching at home. Trump chose Bobby Lashley, a powerhouse, built like a brick wall with jet engines attached. McMahon went with Umaga, the Samoan bulldozer. Special guest referee? Stone Cold Steve Austin, of course. Because what's a billionaire brawl without a few stunners and beer cans? And then came the moment. Midway through the chaos, with bodies flying and ropes rattling, Trump charged across the ring and tackled Vince McMahon to the mat. Yes. The 60-year-old real estate mogul launched himself at the WWE boss in a full-speed takedown. The crowd lost it. The camera zoomed. Twitter, still young and impressionable in 2007, caught fire. Trump's guy won. Umaga was pinned. And McMahon, furious and flailing, was dragged to a barber's chair in the middle of the ring. Trump and Lashley stood over him with clippers like executioners in tuxedos. The crowd counted each swipe. Hair hit the mat. Trump grinned like a man who had just acquired a skyscraper made of fireworks. It was bizarre. It was pure theater. And it was wildly on brand. For Trump, the appearance wasn't just about entertainment. It was about dominance, about optics. He wasn't playing a role, he was being Trump, larger than life, unbothered by irony. In a world where wrestling thrives on exaggeration, Trump fit in perfectly. He was a character, just one who didn't need a costume. And it worked. The event drew over 80,000 fans. Pay-per-view numbers soared. Trump was credited, at least partially, with helping WrestleMania 23 become one of the most successful shows in WWE history. He didn't need to throw a punch to win. He simply was the spectacle. Years later, his friendship with McMahon remained intact. Linda McMahon, Vince's wife and former WWE executive, would eventually serve in Trump's cabinet as head of the Small Business Administration. Because of course she did. In the Trump orbit, wrestling and politics weren't separate universes. They were the same, play just different costumes. Trump's WrestleMania moment wasn't a detour from his persona. It was a confirmation of it. Loud, unapologetic, perfectly staged. He didn't just appear in the circus. He ran the ring for a night. And while most presidents get statues, Trump got body slammed, willingly. But next, we shift from pile drivers to Pinot Noir. Because, believe it or not, the same man who once shaved a billionaire's head in front of 80,000 fans also owns a sprawling vineyard. Let's uncork that. Owns a vineyard. Tucked in the rolling hills of Virginia, just outside Charlottesville, lies something you might not expect to find in Donald Trump's empire. Rows upon rows of quiet, sun-drenched grapevines. Welcome to Trump Winery, a sprawling 300-acre estate where the air smells like fermenting fruit and presidential branding. Yes, Donald Trump owns a vineyard. And no, he doesn't drink. Not a drop. This is one of the stranger contradictions in the Trump portfolio, a teetotaler running a wine business. It's like a vegan opening a butcher shop. But for Trump, the logic is simple. You don't have to consume the product to sell it. You just have to slap your name on the bottle and tell people it tastes like success. The property itself was originally known as Kluge Estate Winery and Vineyard, owned by Patricia Kluge, the former wife of a media billionaire. After financial troubles led to foreclosure, Trump swooped in around 2011 and bought it at a steep discount. It was classic Trump timing by distressed, rebrand aggressively, spin it like it was the plan all along. The rebrand was swift. New signage, new label. Trump Winery. in gold-embossed lettering, with a crest that looks like it should be on the gates of a golf course or the cover of a family crest you buy at a Renaissance fair. Overnight, Virginia had its most controversial vintner. Trump appointed his son, Eric Trump, to run the operation, giving it the appearance of a family business even as it leaned heavily on hired hands and seasoned vintners. The wines produced include Chardonnay, Merlot, Cabernet Sauvignon, and sparkling Brut, a full spread of varietals. Some of them have even won regional awards, although the wine world is generally lukewarm about the brand's overall prestige. Still, the estate is undeniably impressive. It features a luxury hotel, a tasting room, a ballroom frequently used for weddings, and a reputation for grandeur. Guests can sip rosé on a patio overlooking the Blue Ridge Mountains while, somewhere behind the scenes, a Trump is approving label fonts. The irony of the whole thing isn't lost on anyone. Trump doesn't drink because of personal convictions tied to family tragedy. And yet he markets alcohol with the same fervor he applies to steaks, cologne, and board games. His presence in the wine industry isn't about passion for Pinot, it's about market share, about visibility, about turning an ancient art into another revenue stream. During his presidency, he often mentioned the winery, sometimes inaccurately referring to it as the largest in the United States. It isn't. He brought it up in speeches, interviews, and press briefings, usually as proof that he understood business better than his critics. It wasn't just a vineyard, it was another trophy. Today, Trump Winery still operates, still bottles, still books weddings for couples looking to start their lives in a place where the wine flows and the branding never sleeps. And if you think it's odd that a president who won't touch a drink runs a vineyard, remember this is the same man who once bottled his own vodka without ever tasting it. Custom Boeing 757. They call it Trump Force One. Not officially, of course, but that's what everyone calls it. A private Boeing 757, decked out like a flying penthouse, emblazoned with Trump in 10-foot gold letters across the fuselage. It's not just a plane, it's a monument. A jet-propelled ego that cruises at 41,000 feet. Trump bought the aircraft in 2011 from Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen. Then he gutted it. Not just updated, I tree-built it. The interior was refitted with 24-karat gold seatbelt buckles, high-gloss wood veneer panels, leather seats that recline into beds, and a home theater system with a 57-inch screen. The bathroom? Marble sinks, gold fixtures, private jet Versailles. The cockpit stayed mostly the same, but behind that luxury aviation, custom everything. Family crest stitched into the headrests, embroidered pillows, personalized drinkware. It was Air Force One if the State Department had been replaced by the set designers from Scarface. And unlike some moguls who use private jets for stealth and convenience, Trump used his like a campaign bus with wings. He wanted to be seen. The plane was often parked in full view at campaign rallies, turning airport hangars into amphitheaters. Supporters cheered as the jet rolled in like a rock star tour, the name catching sunlight like a billboard made of steel. It wasn't just a ride, it was an entrance. Trump would descend the staircase like a general returning from conquest, waving, thumbs-upping, soaking in the applause. It was spectacle as political strategy. And it worked. He flew it extensively during the 2016 campaign, logging tens of thousands of miles across battleground states. And every time it appeared in the sky, the media followed. Even when Trump was grounded by Air Force One as president, Trump Force One stayed in the public eye. It became a symbol, a brand extension, a physical metaphor for Trump himself. Loud, gold-trimmed, impossible to ignore. But the plane had its low moments too. After leaving office, it sat idle at an airport in New York, under wraps and in need of repairs. For months, it became a punchline. Images surfaced of the jet collecting dust, prompting headlines about Trump's grounded ego. But then, just like that, it was restored. New engines, fresh paint, back in the air. The relaunch was announced with fanfare, of course. Trump released a statement calling it beautiful, sleek, better than ever. In other words, very Trump. And sure enough, it resumed its campaign appearances as he re-entered the political stage in 2024, like an old gladiator returning to the arena on a golden chariot. Because the plane isn't just transportation, it's messaging. It says, "I'm not like other politicians. I'm bigger, flashier, louder, and it flies. On brand, on time, on camera." And while the rest of the world debates policies and polls, Trump boards a 757 with gold buckles and flies into the narrative like he's in a movie trailer. But let's descend for a moment. Back to the ground. Back to something oddly absent. Because despite all the pomp and personal branding, there's something Trump never brought to the White House. No bark, no paws, no loyal companion curled at the foot of the bed. Let's talk about the only president in modern history with zero pets. No pets in the White House. For over 2 centuries, the White House has echoed with more than just the voices of presidents and their staff. It's hosted a menagerie of dogs, cats, parrots, ponies, and even alligators. Pets have been a political tradition, so much so that historians often remember the animals almost as vividly as the people who owned them. Fala, Socks, Bo, and Sunny. They were more than animals. They were characters in the national story. But when Donald Trump moved in, the barking stopped. He became the first U.S. president in more than 100 years to not have a pet. No tail-wagging greeter at the portico, no feline prowling the Resolute desk. No holiday photos with a festively dressed golden retriever. The most animal-like presence in Trump's White House was probably the taxidermy moose in someone's metaphor. Why? Trump has never been a pet guy. He said as much. In interviews, he's expressed confusion over the emotional bond people have with animals. "I don't have time," he once said, when asked why he didn't own a dog. "How would I look walking a dog on the White House lawn?" The answer for most Americans would probably be normal. But Trump doesn't do normal, and he certainly doesn't do sentimentality. Dogs, in his view, are for other people. Loyalty, to him, isn't about companionship, it's transactional. He prefers applause to affection. He doesn't want a Labrador licking his face. He wants a crowd chanting his name. This lack of a pet wasn't just a quirk, it was symbolic. In a place where presidents usually try to soften their image with relatable touches, Trump went the other way. No dog, no soft edges. Just marble, mirrors, and red ties. His presidency was an image machine, and there was no room for muddy paws. Ironically, Trump talked about dogs a lot, just never kindly. He used dog as an insult. Fired like a dog, choked like a dog, dropped like a dog. The phrase popped up in speeches and tweets with brutal regularity. To him, dogs weren't man's best friend. They were metaphors for defeat. And yet, the absence was noticeable. Journalists remarked on it. Late-night hosts joked about it. Former presidents chimed in, noting how the simple presence of a pet helped with stress, public perception, even diplomacy. Dogs humanized the office. Trump rejected that humanization. Still, the petless presidency didn't hurt his brand. In fact, it might have enhanced it. It made him seem different. Unsentimental, hyper-practical. The kind of leader who doesn't have time to throw tennis balls or clean litter boxes. But for the public? It added to the feeling that this was a presidency without warmth. No slobbering golden retrievers to lighten the mood. No first cat wandering into press briefings. Just the sound of silence and maybe the faint echo of Fox News in the background. And so the White House lawn stayed quiet. The Oval Office remained hair-free. And the long tradition of furry companions took a 4-year break. But don't worry. If Trump didn't bring a pet, he brought something else to the national spotlight, something just as well known, if not more so. A catchphrase, a cold stare, and two words that changed the reality TV landscape forever. You're fired. The Apprentice, catchphrase. You're fired. Two words. Simple, final, lethal in the boardroom, immortal in pop culture. Donald Trump didn't invent the phrase, but he weaponized it. He sculpted it into a verbal guillotine, trimmed it in dramatic pauses, and dropped it like a hammer every week on national television. It wasn't just a lineage, it was a ritual, a moment, a meme before memes existed. The Apprentice premiered in 2004. The concept was straightforward. A group of ambitious contestants competed in business-themed challenges for the ultimate reward, a job in the Trump organization. But the real hook wasn't the competition. It was Trump, seated behind a massive desk like a gold-plated god, evaluating each contestant with the cold detachment of a man deciding whether to renovate or demolish. He'd listen to their pitches, raise an eyebrow, maybe ask a brutal question about margins or leadership. And then, once the tension was perfectly thick, you're fired. Cut to gasps, silence, or an overly dramatic nod. The camera would hold. The music would drop. Trump would lean back like a judge passing sentence in a designer suit. It was mesmerizing. The show made Trump a household name again, not as a real estate mogul, but as a cultural force. He wasn't just a businessman anymore. He was the businessman. The one who didn't flinch. The one who knew the answer. The one who fired people like it was a moral responsibility. "You're fired" became a catchphrase in the truest sense. It was printed on merchandise, parodied on SNL, quoted in playgrounds, boardrooms, and even political debates. It transcended the show and entered the cultural bloodstream. Kids said it to each other at recess, executives said it in meetings as a joke, and sometimes not as a joke. And Trump knew exactly what he had. He leaned into the character, growing bolder each season. His delivery sharpened, his smugness calibrated to perfection. He played to the cameras, shaped narratives, and made sure every episode ended with him on top. Behind the scenes, producers knew Trump was the show. His presence carried it. His instincts for conflict, confrontation, and climactic payoffs kept viewers glued. Ratings soared. NBC kept greenlighting new seasons. Spin-offs followed. Celebrity editions, themed challenges, branded products. It was a franchise. And at the center of it all, that phrase. What made it work wasn't just the delivery, it was the way Trump used it as a symbol. "You're fired" wasn't just a dismissal. It was judgment. A declaration that you weren't good enough, that you failed, that you didn't belong in his world of jets, penthouses, and power ties. For Trump, it was a philosophy disguised as a punchline. The show ran until 2015, overlapping with the earliest whispers of his political ambitions. Some say The Apprentice was his launchpad. It gave him a platform, a brand, a persona that millions of Americans recognized and, strangely, trusted. When he ran for president, he didn't have to introduce himself. He had already spent a decade firing people in prime time. And if a catchphrase could make him a television icon, what else could it do? Because next, we follow him from sound stages to silver screens, where Trump didn't just star in a show, he started showing up everywhere. Background, cameos, blink and you miss it moments. Let's talk about the movies. Cameo appearances. Donald Trump has been in more movies than some professional actors. No, really. Not as the lead, not even as a recurring character, but as the guy who shows up, says one line, and somehow hijacks the scene. His cameos are a running joke and a marketing move, a subtle whisper of, "Remember who runs this city," tucked into the celluloid of the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. The most iconic appearance? Home Alone 2. Lost in New York, 1992. Kevin McAllister walks into the Plaza Hotel, Trump's hotel at the time, and asks a tall man in a suit for directions to the lobby. The man, with perfect hair and trademark squint, responds, "Down the hall and to the left." That's it, one line. But the delivery, the confidence, the fact that it was Trump, it stuck. That scene became a cultural artifact. So much so that when the film aired in Canada years later, and the cameo was briefly cut for time, conspiracy theories erupted. People didn't remember the film without Trump. His 7-second appearance had become part of the lore. But Home Alone 2 was just the beginning. Trump's Hollywood resume reads like a bingo card of random 90s and early 2000s pop culture. Zoolander, The Little Rascals, Sex and the City, Spin City, The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Each time, he played himself. Or rather, a slightly shinier, smugger version of himself. He wasn't trying to act, was reinforcing the myth. The Trump who shows up at fashion shows and fancy restaurants, the guy with connections and confidence. The celebrity business mogul who exists in the same world as Derek Zoolander and Will Smith's fictional relatives. These cameos weren't accidental. Trump often required filmmakers to include him in exchange for using one of his properties as a location. Want to shoot in the lobby of Trump Tower? Sure, but I get a line. Want to film in my hotel? Put me in the background. It was contractually baked in, a literal price of admission. It's a strange form of immortality, part landlord, part walk-on star. But that's the Trump brand in motion. Omnipresence. Not a character arc, just presence. Always there. Always reminding you who's got the biggest building on the block. And each cameo added to the image. Trump as symbol of power, opulence, access. He's not solving crimes or fighting aliens, she's just there, as if to say, "You know I belong in this scene." Sometimes it's one line, sometimes just a nod or a smile, but it always lands like a signature. It worked, too. By the time The Apprentice launched, he was already woven into the cultural wallpaper. A familiar face you'd seen in sitcoms and kids' movies, quietly selling himself between punchlines and plot twists. Trump didn't need to be in Hollywood. He made Hollywood come to him. But that's just screen presence. What about real estate presence? Because while he appeared briefly in fictional buildings, he was also reshaping the actual skyline. Next, we turn our eyes upward to glass, steel, and ego-stacked 98 stories tall, the Trump Tower in Chicago, where real estate becomes monument. Owns a skyscraper in Chicago. Standing on the north bank of the Chicago River, casting its glassy shadow across the city's architectural skyline, is the Trump International Hotel and Tower Chicago. It's 98 stories of chrome confidence, sharp edges, cold steel, and a name stretched vertically down the side in 5 giant letters that you can't miss even if you're trying. Completed in 2009, the Trump Tower Chicago was designed by architect Adrian Smith, the same man behind the Burj Khalifa. This wasn't just another branded property, it was a flagship. A gleaming, mixed-use behemoth of condos, hotel suites, restaurants, and luxury everything. Trump had wanted to build the tallest building in the world. Chicago said, "Maybe not the tallest, but you can have the second tallest in the city." He took it anyway. At its opening, the tower was the second tallest in the Western Hemisphere. It stands 389 feet tall, including its spire, just behind the Willis Tower, formerly Sears Tower. And like all things Trump, the building isn't just big, it's big on purpose. An architectural declaration of intent. The tower features a 5-star hotel, luxury residences, a full-service spa, Michelin-starred dining, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offer panoramic views of Lake Michigan and the skyline. Inside, it's marble floors, golden finishes, and concierge service tuned to billionaire frequency. Outside, it reflects the city literally. The mirrored surface changes throughout the day, absorbing and reprojecting the Chicago light. But the real showstopper? The name. In 2014, enormous stainless steel letters spelling out Trump were affixed to the side of the building 20 feet high, visible from miles away. It wasn't subtle. It never was meant to be. Trump defended the move, saying it was part of the original design. City officials disagreed. Former Mayor Rahm Emanuel called it architecturally tasteless. Critics said it defaced one of the most beautiful skylines in America. Trump, predictably, shrugged and smiled. The sign stayed. And in that moment, the building stopped being just architecture. It became a battleground. For some, it was a symbol of economic optimism, high living, and bold development. For others, it was an act of visual aggression, branding run amok, ego rendered in metal. But for Trump, it was mission accomplished. Another fortress in his portfolio, another tower with his name looming over a major American city. The building also doubled as a political backdrop. During his 2016 campaign and beyond, it became a site of protest, pilgrimage, and controversy. Crowds gathered outside, banners flew. Supporters took selfies with the name. Detractors turned their backs. The tower didn't just reflect. Chicagoite began reflecting the country's division. Yet, inside, the operation kept humming. People still booked suites. Residents still enjoyed the view. Luxury, in many ways, ignores noise. Trump Tower Chicago is Trump in structural, form tall, unavoidable, proud to declare itself, not elegant, not restrained, just there, in all its shiny defiance. And if you think that tower is a statement, wait until we talk about a political one. Because before Trump ever ran for president, before the rallies and the slogans, he did something no one expected. He ran for office with zero political or military experience. Next, let's talk about the first president who entered the White House having never held a government job, not even once. First president without prior military or government service. When Donald Trump was elected president in 2016, he broke a lot of political norms. But perhaps the most jarring of all was this. He had never held public office, never served in the military, never governed anything that wasn't a business. He went from private citizen to commander-in-chief in one lepa jump no one else in American history had ever successfully pulled off. That's not just rare, that's unprecedented. Every president before him came in with a resume that included, at the very least, one of the following: governor, senator, congressman, cabinet secretary, general, vice president, or war hero. They climbed ladders. Trump brought an elevator. No state houses, no city councils, no military uniforms, not even a school board meeting. His only qualification was himself, his business empire, his fame, and his certainty that he could do the job better than anyone who had ever done it before. And somehow, millions agreed. It wasn't that Trump hid this fact. He leaned into it, bragged about it, framed it as a virtue. "I'm not a politician," he said, again and again. It became a rallying cry, a weapon against the swamp, and a badge of authenticity. The outsider, the disruptor, the man who didn't owe the system anything because he'd never been a part of it. And in a country exhausted by gridlock, scandal, and career doublespeak, that pitch hit home. Voters who were sick of insiders saw Trump's inexperience not as a gap, but as a clean slate. What he lacked in political finesse, they figured, he'd make up for in raw leadership. But make no mistake, this wasn't just unusual. It was a full departure from the American tradition. George Washington, military general, Abraham Lincoln, congressman, FDR, governor of New York, Ronald Reagan, governor of California, former Union president. Even Barack Obama, despite being relatively new on the scene, had served in the Illinois State Senate and U.S. Senate before stepping onto the national stage. Trump had none of it. He hadn't served in the armed forces, received multiple draft deferments during the Vietnam War, citing bone spurs. He hadn't passed legislation, hadn't signed a budget, hadn't navigated bureaucracy. His prior executive experience was managing a private company where the only vote that mattered was his own. And that showed. His transition into the presidency was one of the bumpiest in modern history. He clashed with institutions, appointees, and the press with equal ferocity. Where past presidents deferred to tradition, Trump often bulldozed through it. He didn't follow the blueprint, questioned why there was one at all. For supporters, that was the point. He wasn't trained by Washington. He was built by boardrooms and ratings wars. And to them, that made him real. For critics, it was chaos. A man navigating nuclear policy with the same bravado he used to fire contestants on TV. Either way, the precedent had been set. Trump redefined what kind of resume it takes to win the presidency. The answer, at least once, was none. And if you think that was his only norm-shattering move, think again. Because after getting kicked off the world's biggest social media platforms, Trump did what only Trump would do. He built his own. Next, we log into Truth Social. Launched his own social media platform. After being banned from Twitter, Facebook, and several other major platforms in early 2021, Donald Trump did what Donald Trump always does when faced with a closed door. He kicked open his own. The result was Truth Social, a social media platform launched under the Trump Media Technology Group as his personal answer to big tech's censorship hammer. It wasn't just a business decision. It was a branding campaign, a digital declaration of independence. From the start, Truth Social was pitched as a free speech alternative to Twitter, a place where users could say what they wanted without the risk of being deplatformed for violating vague terms of service. In reality, the platform was very much about Trump's voice, his presence, his need to broadcast. When it launched in February 2022, it stumbled out of the gate. The waitlist ballooned, the app glitched, downloads lagged, critics scoffed. But it didn't matter. Because the app wasn't meant to replace Twitter for the world. It was meant to replace Twitter for Trump. And that, it did. Trump quickly became the dominant voice on the platform. His posts called Truths, of course, started flowing. He commented on everything from politics to ratings to his favorite topics, himself and his enemies. The engagement was immediate. Supporters migrated. Media outlets followed, not because they liked the platform, but because they couldn't afford to ignore it. Truth Social wasn't just a new home for Trump's digital voice, it was a continuation of his strategy: control the narrative, control the platform, control the spotlight. On Twitter, he played by someone else's rules. On Truth Social, he was the rules. The platform featured familiar functions like shares, replies, but wrapped in a Trumpian aesthetic. The interface borrowed heavily from existing platforms, but the branding? Pure red, white, and rebellious. It was part soapbox, part echo chamber, and fully in service of the Trump brand. But Truth Social wasn't just for Trump. Other conservative figures joined, some banned or suspended elsewhere. The platform marketed itself as a refuge for the silenced, the canceled, and the patriotically frustrated. Whether or not it ever achieved mainstream traction, it didn't need to. It served its core function, giving Trump an unfiltered megaphone. And while tech analysts raised eyebrows over its financials, infrastructure, and real reach, Trump remained the central node in the Truth Social network. Every post was a headline, every jab a news cycle. By 2024, the app had become more than a refuge. It was a launchpad used to communicate campaign messages, jab at rivals, and signal policy stances. No press briefings, no middlemen, just Trump, typing in all caps if necessary, beaming his thoughts straight to the base. The irony? Trump had once risen to political dominance through Twitter, but now, divorced from it, he proved he could still bend the information space to his will so long as he owned the stage. And, speaking of stages, we rewind now to one he conquered twice, once as a host, once as a guest. Because not many people can say they've been president and hosted Saturday Night Live, but Trump can. Hosted Saturday Night Live twice. Donald Trump is one of the rare individuals who's both parodied on Saturday Night Live and has actually hosted it twice. That's a short list. An even shorter one if you're talking about people who've also been president of the United States. The stage at Studio 8H has seen comedy royalty, Hollywood stars, musical legends, and a real estate mogul with a red tie and an ego that could fill all 17 floors of 30 Rock. His first time hosting was in 2004, during the height of the Apprentice's popularity. Trump was still in his businessman-turned-celebrity era, riding high off the show's massive ratings and his own carefully curated image as America's boss. The episode was a classic mid-2000s time capsule, plenty of gold, plenty of self-parody, and Trump fully embracing the sketch format, even if his comedic timing was unconventional. He leaned into the Trump caricature, spoofing himself in sketches that featured over-the-top wealth, awkward power dynamics, and his now legendary hair. One recurring theme? The idea that Trump doesn't really understand how normal people live. And that disconnect, strangely, made him funny if only because he was completely unbothered by it. His second time hosting came in 2015, right after he announced his presidential run. The timing was explosive. Trump had just descended the escalator. He had just delivered the speech that would light a political wildfire, and now he was back on SNL, this time as a political figure. The 2015 episode aired to huge ratings, zone of the highest of the season. Protesters gathered outside NBC's headquarters, furious that the network was platforming a candidate who had already made inflammatory comments. Inside, the tone was surreal. Trump appeared in sketches poking fun at his campaign, his image, and his uniquely Trumpian speech patterns. One sketch even featured multiple versions of Trump, including Larry David shouting, "You're a racist," from the audience, an actual stunt orchestrated for publicity. Despite the backlash, Trump didn't flinch. He grinned. He hit his marks. He read cue cards like they owed him money. Critics called it bizarre. Fans called it bold. Either way, it was very SNL and very Trump, a chaotic collision of media, fame, and politics. That episode cemented something important. Trump didn't just thrive on attention, he engineered it. He blurred the line between entertainment and campaign trail, between satire and sincerity. He didn't have to convince people he was presidential. He just had to convince them he was unforgettable. And that's exactly what SNL gave him. A platform not to soften his image, but to amplify it. Loud, brash, unapologetic. Laughing at himself just enough to deflect criticism, but not enough to lose control of the narrative. It was a campaign commercial wrapped in sketch comedy, a rally disguised as a monologue. And if you thought parody was the peak, just wait, because a cartoon managed to call it way before anyone else. Next, we talk about The Simpsons, and the eerily prophetic episode that imagined a Trump presidency long before it became real. Featured in The Simpsons. In the vast and weirdly accurate canon of The Simpsons predictions, one stands above the rest: the Trump presidency. It happened in the year 2000, during season 11, episode 17 titled Bart to the Future. The episode flashes forward to a dystopian future where Lisa Simpson becomes President of the United States. As she addresses her cabinet, she casually drops a line that would become chillingly iconic years later. "We've inherited quite a budget crunch from President Trump." Cue the eerie music. Back in 2000, the idea of Donald Trump as president was pure satire, a punchline, a laugh, The writers of The Simpsons had no crystal ball. They were riffing on what seemed like the most absurd scenario imaginable. Trump had flirted with politics before, kind of. He talked about running as a Reform Party candidate in 2000, but most assumed it was a PR stunt, a sideshow, a Trumpian flash in the pan. But then 2016 happened, and suddenly that 15-year-old cartoon joke didn't feel so funny anymore. Fans went back to the episode. Clips resurfaced. The line became a meme, a warning, a prophecy, and the internet exploded with theories. Did The Simpsons know something we didn't? Was this satire or sorcery? The truth? It was luck. Smart, cynical, media-savvy luck. The show's writers have said they simply chose the most outlandish, attention-grabbing name they could think of. Who's the least likely person to ever run the country? Donald Trump. And that, ironically, is what made the joke land. But The Simpsons didn't stop there. Over the years, they kept taking jabs at Trump, sometimes subtle, sometimes not. Episodes featured animated versions of him with exaggerated hair, exaggerated hands, and, well, exaggerated everything. He became a recurring character in their satire of American absurdity. And Trump, ever conscious of image, noticed. He reportedly didn't love being mocked on the show, but he never really fought it, either. Because in the Trump media playbook, attention is currency. If people are watching even to laugh, you're still winning. The phenomenon also speaks to something bigger. Trump's place in American pop culture was so deeply entrenched that even the most surreal show on TV saw his rise as inevitable, if only for the sake of the punchline. When you're a fixture of tabloids, late-night shows, and real estate gossip columns, you're not just a person, you're a character. Trump had been playing one version of himself for decades. The Simpsons simply sketched it in yellow. And when real life caught up to the animation, it wasn't just a coincidence. It was a sign of how thoroughly Donald Trump had blurred the line between fiction and reality, between parody and power. Because when you become the joke and the punchline and the president, you're not just in on the joke. You are the joke. But even jokes need somewhere to land. And Trump, ever the strategist, found his stage not in Washington, not in Hollywood, but in Florida. Next, we visit Mar-a-Lago Gilded Beach Club turned Winter White House. Owns Mar-a-Lago. Mar-a-Lago is a place where everything is oversized. The chandeliers, the drapes, the ego. It's part Mediterranean mansion, part social club, part political bunker. And ever since Donald Trump purchased it in 1985, it's been more than just a property. It's been the heart of his personal brand, his post-presidency headquarters, and arguably the most controversial beach club in American history. Located in Palm Beach, Florida, Mar-a-Lago stretches across 20 acres of oceanfront real estate. Originally built in the 1920s by serial heiress Marjorie Merriweather Post, it was intended to serve as a winter retreat for American presidents. Post even willed the estate to the federal government for that purpose, but the government politely declined, twice citing maintenance costs. Enter Donald Trump. He scooped up the property for a reported $10 million a bargain, even in the 80s. And immediately, he started transforming it, renovating it, gilding it, Trumpifying it, gold fixtures, gaudy ballrooms, acres of marble. It went from historic estate to glitzy fortress. But Mar-a-Lago wasn't just a mansion to Trump, it was a stage. In the 1990s, after running into financial trouble, he converted it into a private club. Membership required a steep initiation fee, but came with access to the private beach, tennis courts, fine dining, and of course, proximity to Trump himself. It wasn't just a social club, it was a social climb. And for decades, Trump hosted everyone from European royals to TV stars within its marble corridors. Business deals were made, parties thrown, weddings held. Then in 2016, everything changed. When Trump was elected president, Mar-a-Lago shifted from playground to power base. It became the so-called Winter White House. He spent significant stretches of his presidency there, holding meetings with world leaders like Japan's Shinzo Abe, greeting international dignitaries between golf rounds and buffet spreads. Photographs circulated of classified briefings being discussed on open patios, waitstaff looming nearby. The setting wasn't just unorthodox, it was deeply surreal. National security and seafood towers on the same table. But the optics didn't deter Trump. He reveled in them. The chandeliers, the palm trees, the constant presence of camera sit was Trump in his element. And supporters loved it. They traveled there, hoping to catch a glimpse. Mar-a-Lago hats were sold. Events were live-streamed. It became both fortress and theater. After leaving the White House, Trump returned to Mar-a-Lago full-time. Not New York, not D.C., Florida, Palm Beach, his golden castle by the sea. And there, he began plotting his political future, hosting fundraisers, strategy sessions, and rallies. The estate also became ground zero for investigations, lawsuits, and late-night FBI searches. Sensitive documents reportedly stored in ballrooms and bathrooms. Allegations flew, defenses were mounted. Mar-a-Lago wasn't just a residence, it was a battlefield. And yet, the parties continued. The chandeliers kept glittering. The staff kept passing hors d'oeuvres under oil paintings of Trump himself. Because Mar-a-Lago is more than bricks and columns, it's a metaphor for power, for branding, for the merging of personal indulgence and public life. And if the mansion told one story, the merchandise told another. Because next, we slice into a meteor chapter: Trump steaks. Yes, those Trump steaks, the ones that once tried to make America taste great. Developed Trump steaks. Imagine biting into a ribeye and thinking, this tastes like capitalism. That was the dream behind Trump Steaks Premium. Cuts of meat marketed not just as food, but as a lifestyle, a taste of opulence. A slab of presidential branding delivered straight to your grill. Launched in 2007, Trump Steaks was an ambitious but short-lived venture that aimed to bring the Trump name to your dinner plate. Not through supermarkets, not through butcher shops, but through the sharper Imagia retailer, best known for massage chairs and air purifiers. Yes, Trump tried to sell steak through a store that didn't even carry groceries, but that didn't stop him from going all in. Commercials aired featuring Trump staring into the camera with a steak knife in hand, declaring, "When it comes to great steaks, I've just raised the stakes." He bragged about the marbling, the flavor, the exclusivity. The branding leaned hard on his signature confidence. This wasn't just beef. This was Trump beef, elite, decisive, medium rare with a side of bravado. The actual steak sirloins, bone-in ribeyes, filet mignons are packaged in deluxe gift boxes and sold at premium prices. One package could run hundreds of dollars. Customers could order online or through a glossy catalog filled with glamour shots of sizzling meat and gilded fonts. But it didn't work. The problem wasn't just the price. It was the pitch, the disconnect between the Trump luxury image and the product itself. People didn't walk into the sharper image expecting to buy food. And even those who were curious often balked at the price tag. Reviews were mixed. The steaks weren't bad. Persebute, they weren't world-changing, either. Just meat wrapped in marketing. Within a year, the product disappeared from shelves. Sharper Image pulled the plug, citing poor sales and customer confusion. It became one of Trump's more notorious failed ventures, right up there with Trump Vodka and Trump University. But Trump didn't see it that way. In typical fashion, he declared it a great idea, unfairly targeted. They were the best steaks, he later claimed. People loved them. Even years later, during campaign stops, he'd occasionally reference them. During one infamous moment, he stood behind a table of assorted product steaks: water, wine pointing to each as proof of his business success. The catch? The steaks weren't even from his original line. They were from a local butcher. The optics didn't matter. The message was clear. Trump equals success, even when the details don't check out. And that's the real story behind Trump steaks. It wasn't about meat. It was about mythology, about selling not just a product, but an identity. Juicy, marbled, medium rare identity. The venture failed, but the branding didn't. People still talk about Trump steaks. They became a meme, a punchline, a trivia fact that somehow says more about the man than 1,000 campaign speeches. Because if you're willing to sell steak through a store that sells neck massagers, you're not just in business, you're in the business of being unforgettable. And speaking of unforgettable flops, next we slice into another ill-fated branding experiment, Trump University. Where knowledge was a product, lawsuits were the syllabus, and the diploma was mostly regret. Trump University controversy. It started with a promise. Learn from the master. Donald Trump, the deal maker, the mogul. The brand was offering the secrets to success, not in a book, not in a show, but in a university. Kind of, sort of, technically, not really. Trump University launched in 2005 as a for-profit education venture aimed at teaching the art of real estate and entrepreneurship. Its slogan was simple and bold. We teach success. It featured glossy ads, personal endorsements from Trump, and the implication that you were getting inside access to his billion-dollar brain. What students actually got was something very different. First, the name. Trump University wasn't a university in the legal sense. It had no accreditation, no degree programs, no professors, just seminars, workshops, motivational speeches wrapped in upsells. It was more of a self-help boot camp than an institution of higher learning. After pressure from state officials, the name was eventually changed to the Trump Entrepreneur Initiative. The curriculum centered around real estate investing, buy low, sell high, leverage financing, hustle hard. Sounds useful in theory. In practice, it was closer to a sales funnel. Entry-level courses cost about $1,500. Then came the Gold Elite program, a 35-0 package that promised access to Trump's inner circle of real estate experts. But Trump was nowhere to be found. He didn't teach. He didn't review lesson plans. His involvement was limited to promotional videos and ghost-written quotes. The people leading the seminars were often salespeople, not seasoned investors. They encouraged students to open new credit cards to afford tuition. They sold dreams castles in the air built on mortgage applications. Then came the lawsuits. By 2013, Trump University faced a barrage of legal challenges. The most high-profile came from former students who claimed they were misled, promised insider knowledge, but delivered little more than motivational cliches and high-pressure pitches. The New York Attorney General filed a $40 million suit. 2 class-action lawsuits followed in California. During the 2016 presidential campaign, the issue exploded. Court documents revealed internal emails, training manuals, and instructions for instructors to pressure students emotionally. Phrases like, "Don't let them think too long," and "Money is never a reason not to enroll," painted a troubling picture. Trump, for his part, denied everything, called the lawsuits politically motivated, called the students failures looking for free money. And then, just days after winning the presidency, he settled the case for $25 million without admitting wrongdoing. To critics, Trump University was a textbook example of predatory capitalism. To supporters, it was just another business that didn't pan out. To Trump, it was a smear campaign he paid to end so he could move on. But the legacy stuck. Even now, years later, it's brought up as shorthand for Trump's brand of ambition. Big promises, slick marketing, messy execution. It wasn't just a failed business, it was a parable about trust, about branding, about what happens when education becomes entertainment. And if you thought real estate school was a strange branding move, just wait next. We toast to a venture even more off-brand for a lifelong teetotaler. Trump Vodka. Trump Vodka venture. Here's a riddle. What do you call a vodka launched by a man who doesn't drink? Answer: Trump Vodka. It was tall. It was gold. It was imported. It was success distilled. And for a brief, bewildering period in the mid-2000s, it was the Trump brand's most intoxicating product literally. Launched in 2006 in partnership with Drinks Americas, Trump Vodka was marketed as a luxury spirit for people who wanted their liquor to look as expensive as their watches. The bottle itself was a statement tall, rectangular, with sharp edges and metallic trim. It looked less like something you'd pour and more like something you'd display next to a gold-plated chessboard. The tagline was simple: success has a taste. Trump leaned into it hard. He promoted the vodka in full-page ads, red carpet appearances, and bar launches. He talked about it as if it were the next Louis Vuitton of liquor. "I'm going to make the finest vodka on the market," he declared. "This is a superb product, and I'm proud to put my name on it." But behind the scenes, Trump never took a sip, not one. He doesn't drink, hasn't for his entire adult life, ever since his older brother Fred died from alcoholism. He's repeated that story often, even while launching an alcohol brand with his name on it, which made the whole thing complicated. From a marketing perspective, Trump Vodka was built on paradox: the abstinent man selling indulgence, the sober mogul lecturing bartenders on how to sell cocktails. But for Trump, that was irrelevant. The brand was what mattered. The optics, the illusion of sophistication. In his world, you didn't have to believe in the product. You just had to sell it better than anyone else. At first, it looked promising. There were launch parties in New York and Las Vegas. Some high-end clubs picked it up. Trump made appearances, signed bottles, posed with models holding martini glasses. It was everywhere for about a minute. Then, the cracks started to show. Distribution was limited. The price point was too high for mass market appeal, too gimmicky for serious vodka drinkers. Bartenders didn't love it. Critics were lukewarm. Sales fizzled. Within a couple of years, Trump Vodka vanished from most shelves. Drinks Americas eventually admitted defeat. They blamed slow sales and missed targets. Trump, as always, declared the whole thing a win, even as the product quietly died in the background. The vodka never made it into Trump properties in a meaningful way. It was a gold-plated ghost. But of course, nothing truly dies in the Trump brand vault. Bottles of Trump vodka still pop up online. Some unopened, some auctioned off like relics of a strange marketing past. They've become collector's items not for the flavor, but for the novelty. A reminder of a time when luxury branding and liquor crossed paths with reality TV stardom. In the end, Trump Vodka wasn't about drinking. It was about projecting taste. It was about bottling the illusion of elite success, even if it left a strange aftertaste. And if you thought vodka was a weird lane for a teetotaler, let's talk real estate again, but overseas. Because next, we head to Manila, where Trump's name climbed the skyline on a building he didn't build, but definitely branded. Trump Tower Manila. Rising above the Makati skyline in Manila, Philippines, is a tower that glimmers with glass, steel, and a familiar five-letter name, Trump. But here's the twist. Donald Trump didn't build it. He didn't fund it. He didn't design it. What he did was slap his name on it and collect the licensing fees. And yet, for all intents and public perception, it's still known as his tower. Trump Tower Manila, officially completed in 2017, is one of the most high-profile international projects to bear the Trump name. It's a luxury residential skyscraper, boasting sleek architecture, lavish interiors, and the type of opulence Trump branding demands: Italian marble, high-end amenities, infinity pools, and concierge service. It was marketed as the pinnacle of luxury living, and it sold that vision with full Trumpian flair. But it was built by Century Properties Group, a Philippine real estate company led by Jose E.B. Antonio, who happened to be appointed as a special envoy to the U.S. under the Duterte administration. Trump's role in the tower? Pure branding. The Trump Organization licensed the name, and in return, the developers paid for the association. No hammer swung by Trump's hand, no architectural sketches doodled by his pen, but the name? Front and center. This is a classic Trump move. While most associate him with construction and development, much of his modern real estate empire is built on licensing deals. He provides the brand and aura of luxury, power, and visibility, and others do the heavy lifting. Trump Tower Manila is one of the most glittering examples of this model. And it wasn't just a random international venture. The timing of its completion, in the same year Trump entered the White House, sparked scrutiny. Questions were raised about potential conflicts of interest. Was the developer gaining access to U.S. influence by partnering with the president's private company? Was foreign policy tangled with real estate branding? Trump, as usual, dismissed concerns. He said he'd stepped away from active business dealings. Ethics watchdogs and legal experts remained skeptical, but the building stayed, and so did the sign. Inside, Trump Tower Manila is everything you'd expect. Gold accents, high-gloss everything. Promotional materials with words like bespoke, iconic, and unrivaled. It's a tribute to status, the kind where you don't just live in a high-rise, you live in a statement. And while Trump may never walk its halls, his image echoes in the architecture. It's not about geography, it's about identity. In the Trump business model, a building in the Philippines still bolsters the empire, the brand, the myth. It's another reminder that the Trump name isn't about place, it's about perception. You don't need to own the soil if you own the spotlight. And speaking of spotlight, what happens when luxury branding goes domesticento, something softer, something cozier? Next, we swap penthouses for plushness. Trump home furniture, where gold meets upholstery and your living room gets a makeover from the man who gold-leafed his elevator. Trump home furniture line. Donald Trump wants to be in your living room. Literally. In the mid-2000s, amidst a flurry of branded ventures, ranging from steaks to vodka, Trump set his sights on something a bit more domestic furniture. Not just any furniture, though Trump furniture. Welcome to Trump Home, a line of sofas, armoires, and end tables designed to make your home feel like the penthouse suite of a gold-plated hotel. Launched in 2007 in collaboration with Lexington Home Brands, Trump Home was positioned as affordable luxury. The pitch? You too could live like a mogul. The collection promised elegance, grandeur, and a splash of Trumpian exisal in the form of traditional and neoclassical designs. Think rich woods, polished metals, heavy detailing, and the kind of ornamental flourishes that would make Versailles blink twice. The catalog was full of names like Westchester and Central Park, evoking the kind of aspirational Americana that Trump had been selling for decades. The pieces were marketed as sophisticated yet accessible. Timeless, as the brochure said. But make no mistake, this wasn't IKEA. This was Trump by way of Italian villa. And the branding? Meticulous. Every piece carried the Trump name. The promotional materials featured golden backdrops, glamour lighting, and quotes from Trump about the importance of taste. He didn't design the furniture, of course, but his aesthetic fingerprints were all over it. The line expanded into bedroom sets, dining tables, home office collections. You could sit on a Trump sofa, work at a Trump desk, sleep in a Trump bed. Your entire life could be curated under the banner of brand fidelity. For a time, the venture did well. Showrooms popped up. Catalogs circulated. The idea of living like Trump resonated with a certain segment of consumers who wanted luxury that looked expensive even if it wasn't quite gold-plated in real life. But the line also had its limits. Critics found the designs overdone, reviews were mixed, and as Trump's political profile began to rise, so did the controversy surrounding his name. After his presidential run took off in 2015, several companies began distancing themselves from Trump-branded products. Lexington home brands quietly let the license lapse. Other manufacturers followed. Today, Trump home furniture is mostly a memory, a curiosity on auction sites. A few pieces still circulate among collectors, relics of a moment when political ambitions hadn't yet eclipsed the business brand. But the idea was pure Trump. Insert the brand into every possible crevice of consumer life. Not just buildings, not just wine or steaks, but couches, dressers, lamps, lifestyle itself. If it had surface area, it could carry the name. Because in the Trump ecosystem, everything is for sale, even the chair you watch cable news from. And speaking of places to sit, let's pull up a stool at the ice cream bar. That's right. Next, we explore Trump's brief, sugary foray into the dessert world with a project that sounds like a fever dream: Trump Ice Cream Parlor. Trump Ice Cream Parlor. Yes, it happened. For a short, sugary flicker in time, you could buy ice cream under the Trump brand. Right there inside the Fifth Avenue mecca of gold elevators and marble everything Trump Tower sat the Trump Ice Cream Parlor, a dessert counter for the decadence-minded. It wasn't a franchise, it wasn't a chain. It was more of a boutique operation and offshoot of the Trump Grill located in the tower's atrium. But it had a name, a counter, and a menu that leaned into the fantasy. Sundaes served with flair, cones piled high, names that probably flirted with puns like "Make America Melt Again." Okay, not really, but you get the idea. The parlor sold standard treats: vanilla, chocolate, strawberry, plus a handful of premium flavors. The draw wasn't innovation, it was presentation. The idea that you were getting a scoop of luxury, served in the same building where Trump himself held court. This wasn't about ice cream. This was about status with sprinkles. Like everything else Trump branded, it was aggressively on theme. The decor was classic faux European glossy surfaces, polished chrome, black and gold color palettes that somehow made a simple ice cream scoop feel like it came with a real estate brochure. Patrons could grab a cone and stroll the atrium, past Trump-branded ties, bottled water, and MAGA baseball caps. It was dessert as brand immersion. But even for the Trump empire, the parlor didn't last. It quietly shuttered after a few years, somewhere around the late 2000s. No press release, no farewell tour. It melted into obscurity, remembered only by tourists who snapped a photo or ordered a scoop just to say they had. Why did it vanish? Most likely, the same reason many of Trump's smaller ventures do. It was a branding experiment, not a core business. Ice cream is fun, yes, but margins are tight. The market is saturated. And unlike hotels or golf courses, dessert doesn't scale easily into a symbol of global power. You can sell a tower to a billionaire. You can't really upsell a waffle cone. Still, the parlor served a purpose. It added another layer to the Trump ecosystem. It was more than a snack, it was part of the message that even your dessert should have status. That luxury wasn't just for bedrooms or boardrooms, it belonged in your midday treat too. It was the Trump brand boiled down to sugar and cream. Decadent, unnecessary, oddly compelling. And while the parlor is gone, the idea lingers. That anything can be branded, elevated, and sold as a Trump experience. So go ahead, throw out your scoop, because next, we're going all in at the casino. Step into the once glorious, now bankrupt halls of Trump's Taj Mahal, the eighth wonder of the world, where neon met marble, fortunes rose and fell, and the house always wins until it doesn't. Trump's Taj Mahal Casino. There was a time when Atlantic City was the East Coast's gambling paradise, and towering over that neon-lit skyline was the Taj Mahal. Trump's Taj Mahal. Not a replica, not subtle, not a tribute. A full-blown tribute to excess, wrapped in domes, columns, and glowing letters, 5 stories tall. Dubbed the eighth wonder of the world by Trump himself, the Taj Mahal Casino opened in 1990 after years of delays, cost overruns, and hype that could bend steel. It was supposed to be the crown jewel of Atlantic City, a sprawling complex of 200 hotel rooms, 120, 0 square feet of gaming floor, chandeliers from Vienna, and a bill that topped $1 billion. At the time, it was the most expensive casino ever built. The launch was classic: Trump, fireworks, champagne, Michael Jackson. Yes, that Michael Jackson, personally recruited to walk the casino floor and bless it with stardust. Trump beamed for cameras, declared it the finest thing he had ever built, and posed beneath the gold-lettered signage like a monarch christening a kingdom. And for a moment it worked. Crowds came. Slots rang. Dice rolled. The casino raked in cash. The Taj Mahal became a glittering monument to Trump's brand of success: big, brash, and impossible to ignore. It was Vegas on the Jersey Shore, minus the subtlety. But behind the scenes, the cracks were already forming. The casino opened with crushing debt, nearly $900 million, most of it high-interest junk bonds. Trump's empire was stretched thin. He had too many properties, too little cash flow, and a tendency to believe branding alone could paper over bad math. Within a year, the Taj Mahal was in financial trouble. Interest payments loomed, revenues dipped, competition increased. By 1991, Trump was forced to file for bankruptcy protection. He gave up half his stake in the casino to bondholders in exchange for reduced debt and a chance to stay afloat. But it was only the beginning. Over the next 2 decades, the Taj Mahal would cycle through multiple bankruptcies, ownership changes, and rebranding attempts. Trump's involvement gradually diminished. He stepped away from management, licensed his name, and distanced himself from the daily losses. But the name remained. Trump, in lights, on chips, on hotel keycards. By the early 2010s, the casino was bleeding money. It couldn't compete with newer resorts in Pennsylvania and Connecticut. Maintenance slipped, staff was cut, union battles erupted. By 2014, it was on life support. Enter Carl Icahn, billionaire investor and occasional Trump ally. He tried to revive it, negotiated with unions, reinvested cash, but the magic never came back. In 2016, the Taj Mahal closed its doors for good. Atlantic City's crown jewel went dark. A year later, it was bought by Hard Rock International and completely renovated. The Trump name was scrubbed from the building. The gold was toned down. The casino reopened with guitars instead of domes. The era was over. And yet, the legacy remains. Trump's Taj Mahal was never about sustainability. It was about spectacle. It was a monument to confidence, audacity, and the belief that if something looks successful enough, maybe it will be. It was a casino built like a campaign, at glorious, aggressive, and unsustainable. And speaking of glitz meeting collapse, our next stop is another Trump-owned monument to overreach, the Plaza Hotel, where fairy tales met foreclosure. Trump Plaza Hotel. It was the jewel of Fifth Avenue, the backdrop of 1,000 romantic comedies, the epitome of Manhattan luxury. The Plaza Hotel, timeless, iconic, wrapped in gold and nostalgia. And in 1988, Donald Trump bought it like it was a collector's item. He paid $407 million for the property, not through a corporation, not through a partnership. He bought it personally. Trump called it a masterpiece, gushed over its chandeliers, and declared it the Mona Lisa of real estate. And like a man who just bought the world's most famous painting, he didn't just want to own either, wanted to be it. At the time, Trump was riding high on a wave of real estate bravado. He had skyscrapers, casinos, an airline, and now, one of the most storied hotels in America. His wife, Ivana Trump, was installed as president of the Plaza, an unusual but very Trump move. They said it was a business decision. Others called it dynastic branding. Either way, the couple became fixtures in the New York social scene, hosting galas and showing off renovations that leaned hard into the opulent. Trump poured money into the hotel, refurbished rooms, restored ballrooms, polished the crown until it gleamed. But he wasn't just restoring the Plaza, he was rewriting its identity. Where others saw timeless elegance, Trump saw potential for spectacle, for more, for bigger. The numbers, however, didn't sparkle. Trump overpaid. He took out enormous loans to finance the deal. The hotel couldn't generate the revenue to cover its debt. Even with full occupancy and luxury pricing, the math never worked. In real estate, you can't just will a property into profitability with gold paint and press conferences. By 1992, Trump was in financial freefall. The early 90s recession hit, his casinos were drowning, his airline had folded, and the Plaza, losing millions annually. He defaulted on the debt. In a debt restructuring deal, he gave up a 49% stake in the Plaza to lenders, along with operational control. He kept his name attached, but the power? Gone. It was a pattern acquire with fanfare, run with flair, collapse under weight. Still, Trump spun it as a victory. Sometimes by losing a battle, he said, you find a new way to win the war. It was classic Trump logic. Even when he loses, he wins. Or at least, says he does. The Plaza changed hands several times in the following years. It was converted into a mix of condos and hotel rooms. Ivana was gone. The Trump name was gone. The chandeliers stayed. But for a moment, that building was his. Trump didn't just own the Plaza, he wore it. Used it as proof that he could buy American royalty and make it shinier. For him, the building was a trophy, another gold-framed symbol of victory, whether it made money or not. And if a luxury hotel wasn't extreme enough, let's shift to a different kind of modelingless real estate, more runway. Because next, we enter the brief but controversial world of Trump model management, where fashion met immigration law and the flashbulbs never stopped popping. Trump's modeling agency. In 1999, Donald Trump opened a modeling agency, because of course he did. It was called Trump Model Managementa. Glossy, high-stakes entry into the fashion industry built on the idea that Trump could do for runways what he did for real estate, dominate them. He didn't need a background in fashion. He had a name, a Rolodex, and a belief that beauty, like buildings, could be branded. The agency operated like most top-tier modeling agencies on the surface. It scouted talent, signed models, booked gigs, high fashion, print ads, catwalks. Trump models worked across the industry. It was based in New York City, surrounded by competitors like IMG and Elite. But Trump's version came with his signature flair: bold marketing, aggressive recruiting, and, inevitably, controversy. Trump himself rarely got involved in the daily operations, but his fingerprints were all over the brand. He used his celebrity to draw attention. He promised models exposure, prestige, and a shortcut to stardom. "We're going to give the modeling world a run for its money," he said during the agency's launch. And for a while, it worked. Trump models signed faces that went on to work with big-name designers and appear in major campaigns. They graced covers, walked in Fashion Week, and partied at the kinds of events where flashbulbs are louder than conversations. But behind the flash, things weren't so pretty. In 2016, amid Trump's presidential campaign, former models began speaking out. Some alleged exploitative practices, low pay, poor treatment, and questionable legal arrangements. The most serious accusations centered on visas. Several models said they had worked in the U.S. for Trump model management without proper documentation. They claimed the agency had skirted immigration laws by encouraging them to work before their visas were approved, or by misclassifying them as interns. The irony was hard to ignore. Donald Trump, running on a hardline immigration platform, being accused of employing undocumented workers in his own modeling agency. The agency denied any wrongdoing, but the damage was done. Investigative reports dug deeper. Lawsuits were hinted at. Critics seized on the contradiction. Trump, as always, dismissed the controversy. But the timing couldn't have been worse. By 2017, just months after Trump took office, Trump model management shut down, quietly. No press conference, no farewell. Just a closing email to clients and talent, saying the agency was no longer in operation. Officially, the reason given was market pressure. The modeling world had changed. Business was down. But insiders suggested otherwise, that the scrutiny, the legal heat, the shifting winds of the fashion industry made the venture more liability than asset. And just like that, Trump's modeling empire folded. It wasn't the biggest scandal of his career. It wasn't even close. But it was another example of the Trump formula: enter a new industry, shake it up, slap on a logo, and ride the momentum until it stops. He saw models as marketable, glamour as a commodity, and fashion as another front for his ever-expanding brand war. But not everything gets to be immortalized in fabric and flashbulbs. Some ventures, like accessories, are easier to carry. Next, we dig into Trump's line of men's fashion, yes, the ties, the suits, the accessories, and the tiny, persistent irony stitched into every Trump collection label. Trump's ties and accessories. There was a time specifically, the mid-2000s, when you could walk into Macy's and buy a Trump-branded necktie, a Trump dress shirt, a Trump cufflink, a box of Trump cologne labeled Success. It was all part of the Donald J. Trump Signature Collecciona line of men's fashion that aimed to bring boardroom swagger to the masses. It was sleek. It was affordable. It was, as the marketing claimed, style that means business. The idea was simple. Take Trump's image power suit, red tie, executive glare, and package it for the everyday man. The line included ties, suits, shirts, watches, belts, and even eyeglasses, bold stripes, crisp collars. The kind of wardrobe you'd expect to see on a man pointing at a chart in a conference room. And for a while, it worked. Trump's fashion line sold well in department stores. Macy's carried it prominently. Amazon listed the pieces alongside mainstream brands. You could even find Trump ties on the clearance rack at TJ Maxx if you looked hard enough. The branding was textbook Trump, glossy promo shots, quotes about winning and dominance, packaging that oozed confidence. The ties, in particular, became a signature item, bold, long, aggressively colored, a reflection of Trump's own preference for neckwear that practically waved like flags in a boardroom breeze. But then came the irony. Despite Trump's America First messaging, the clothes weren't made in the U.S. Tags on the items read, "Made in China, made in Mexico, made in Bangladesh." The factories were overseas, the labor was cheap, and the contradiction was loud. Critics pounced. How could the self-declared champion of American manufacturing outsource his namesake fashion line? Trump, when pressed, downplayed the controversy. "That's the way the system works," he said. "I wish things were made here." But the tags didn't lie. Then came 2015. Trump announced his presidential run. Politics met retail. Macy's, under pressure from customer boycotts and activist campaigns, dropped the Trump brand. Trump responded in typical fashion by suing for $500 million. He later dropped the suit. The ties disappeared from store shelves. The suits went into liquidation. The cologne faded into the scentless archives of department store history. But for a moment, the Trump fashion line was a real thing, worn by thousands, gifted on Father's Day, pitched as prestige for under 100. And like many Trump ventures, it wasn't about quality. It was about association. The Trump name on your chest, on your wrist, around your neck, a low-cost ticket to the illusion of power. Even today, pieces still float around online. Trump ties are sold as collector's items, symbols of a surreal intersection between politics and haberdashery. They aren't particularly rare, or stylish, or durable, but they're undeniably Trump. And if clothing was just one layer of the persona, let's peel back another one that comes in a bottle, not a box. Because next, we inhale the strange, fragrant tale of Trump's cologne line where masculinity, marketing, and success come bottled with a gold cap. Trump, the fragrance. Yes, Donald Trump has a cologne. Multiple, actually. It started with one word printed on a sleek, masculine bottle. Success. That was the name of the flagship fragrance in Trump's cologne line. Success by Trump. Because subtlety was never going to be part of the pitch. This wasn't just a scent, it was a promise, a lifestyle, an olfactory handshake that said, "I'm not here to smell nice, I'm here to win." Released in 2012 in partnership with perfume manufacturer Five Star Fragrance Company, the cologne was part of a broader effort to turn the Trump brand into a full-blown sensory experience. You could eat the steaks, wear the ties, sleep in the sheets, and now you could smell like the man himself. The bottle was tall, black, and gold, clean lines, heavy cap. A quote from Trump on the box: "Believe in yourself and your vision. Success is your only option." You didn't just spray it on. You applied confidence. The scent itself? Reviews were mixed but generally benign. Notes of juniper, red currant, coriander, musk, and tonka began designed to give off a vibe somewhere between boardroom sharpness and nightclub swagger. It wasn't groundbreaking in the world of cologne. But it wasn't meant to be. It was mass-market masculinity with a side of name recognition. The cologne was sold in department stores, like Macy's, and on online retailers. Trump even promoted it during appearances, once giving out bottles to celebrity Apprentice contestants as if it were an achievement award. "This is what success smells like," he said, probably more than once. And for a while, it sold. Not wildly, but enough to stay in rotation for a few years. Enough to make its way into the sock drawers and medicine cabinets of customers who wanted a whiff of Trumpian self-assurance. But like many Trump ventures tied to consumer branding, the product was less about longevity and more about the moment. The fragrance eventually disappeared from shelves, a casualty of shifting brand priorities and political blowback. As Trump's presidential campaign gained steam in 2015, retailers faced increasing pressure to distance themselves from anything associated with him. Macy's dropped the fragrance alongside his clothing line. Other retailers followed suit. And success by Trump quietly evaporated literally and figuratively into the annals of strange celebrity merch. Yet even in absence, the idea lingered. Trump wasn't selling cologne, was bottling an idea that masculinity, dominance, wealth, and confidence could be spritzed on like armor. And for a man who doesn't drink, doesn't smoke, doesn't wear his heart on his sleeve, but does wear his name on everything, it made perfect sense. A fragrance was just another frontier, another shelf to conquer. The cologne may be discontinued, but you can still find it online eBay listings, collector's auctions, unopened boxes, with their motivational quotes intact. Because in the Trump universe, even a puff of air can be turned into a statement. And speaking of international statements, let's board a flight destination, the Philippines. We're heading to the Southeast Asian skyline, where yet another Trump name pierces the clouds. Wait, no, we've already done that. Let's go domestic again next up. Trump Tower, New York. The original, the fortress. The golden launch pad where the brand, the man, and the myth were born. Trump's Scottish and German ancestry. Before the skyscrapers, before the gold trim, before the campaign rallies and red hats, there was the wind-blasted coast of Scotland and a small German village. The roots of Donald Trump's story don't begin in Manhattan or Mar-a-Lago. They begin in Europe, with a crofter's daughter and a barber's son who would unknowingly seed a family empire that would span continents and headlines. Let's start in Germany. Trump's paternal grandfather, Friedrich Trump, was born in 1869 in Karlstadt, a wine-producing village in the Rhineland-Palatinate region. At 16, Friedrich emigrated to the United States to avoid mandatory military service. He arrived in New York in 1885 with little money and big ambition. He didn't waste time. Friedrich became a barber, moved west during the gold rush, and found his fortune not in panning rivers, but in operating restaurants and hotels in booming mining towns. These establishments, particularly in places like Bennett and Whitehorse in the Yukon, catered to miners and travelers, offering food, lodging, and entertainment. There are historical debates over whether these businesses were essentially brothels, but one thing is clear: Friedrich Trump was not shy about following the money. He returned briefly to Germany in 1901, married a local woman named Elizabeth Christ, and tried to resettle in Karlstadt. But the German authorities weren't amused by his sudden return after dodging military service, and he was denied re-entry rights. So he moved back to the US, this time for good, and eventually settled in the Bronx, where he began investing in real estate. He died in 1918 during the first wave of the Spanish flu. His son, Fred Trump, Donald's father, picked up the torch. Fred took the family fortune and multiplied it, becoming a successful real estate developer in New York City's outer boroughs. He specialized in middle-income housing and was known for his relentless work ethic, frugal business practices, and, later, legal controversies involving racial discrimination in housing rentals. Fred would go on to shape Donald's understanding of business, negotiation, and most critically, branding. But Donald's roots don't stop at the Rhine. Enter Mary Ann MacLeod, Trump Donald's mother. Born in 1912 in the village of Tong on the Isle of Lewis in the Outer Hebrides of Scotland, she spoke Gaelic as her first language and grew up in a small stone house with no indoor plumbing. It was a hard life, cold and windswept, steeped in tradition. At age 17, she boarded a ship to America in search of something more. She arrived in New York in 1930, working as a domestic servant. She met Fred at a dance, married him, and became a U.S. citizen in 1942. Despite her humble beginnings, Mary Ann carried herself with poise and pride in her Scottish identity. Donald often cited her influence, describing her as deeply religious and very traditional. Her thick brogue, Presbyterian values, and meticulous appearance made a strong impression on him. The contrast between Donald's parents is stark. Fred, the stern, hard-edged developer; Mary Ann, the elegant, reserved immigrant with a devotion to family and faith. Together, they forged the framework that would produce a son obsessed with winning, image, and legacy. So while Trump's towers may rise in Manhattan and his jets fly over America, his story begins in the modest homes of Karlstadt and the rocky shores of Lewis. His ancestry is a tale of immigrants, risk-takers, opportunists, people who left everything behind in search of something bigger, something more golden. And it's fitting, really. Because Trump has always framed himself as an original, a self-made man. But behind the name, there's a long, winding trail of history, of movement, of ambition passed down through generations. And speaking of ambition, you've heard about his deals, his towers, his ties. But have you heard about his school days? Military drills, dorm discipline, and a young Trump who wasn't always the boss. Next, we head to the New York Military Academy, where Cadet Trump got his first taste of uniforms, marching orders, and structured chaos. Trump's early military schooling. Before the penthouses, before the towers, before the boardrooms filled with polished mahogany and red ties, Donald Trump marched in formation, not in the military, but in a military school. A rigid, uniformed world that smelled like shoe polish and shouted like a boot camp. Welcome to the New York Military Academy, where a teenage Trump was sent to be straightened out, toughened up, and, if possible, turned into a leader. Trump enrolled at the age of 13, not because he dreamed of a career in uniform, but because his parents thought he needed discipline. By his own account and several other, she was a handful, too assertive, too restless, a little too confident for his Queen's private school to handle. So his father, Fred Trump, made a decision. He packed his son off to Cornwall-on-Hudson, 60 miles north of Manhattan, where Trump would spend 5 formative years in barracks, blazers, and brass. The New York Military Academy wasn't a cushy boarding school. It was a real-deal prep institution with military discipline baked into every corner. Students wore uniforms, marched in drills, kept their beds tight and their shoes shining. You saluted officers. You stood in line. You followed orders. Trump didn't rebel. He thrived. He rose through the ranks quickly, eventually becoming a cadet captain. He played sports baseball, soccer, and football and, by most accounts, was competitive and aggressive on the field. He liked winning. He didn't like rules, but he liked being in charge of them. Classmates recall a Trump who was brash, confident, and always angling for the spotlight. He wasn't the type to sneak out of bed at night. He was the type to take command of the hallway. In yearbook photos, he's sharp and centered. In candid memories, he's the guy you didn't ignore, even if you didn't like him. His instructors described him as intelligent, energetic, and assertive. One teacher remembered him as a loudmouth, but not a troublemaker. Others saw a young man obsessed with image. Even then, Trump was curating a persona-driven, dominant, decisive. He graduated in 1964. Not long after, he enrolled at Fordham University, then transferred to the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. But those 5 years in military school left a mark. Trump has said the academy gave him more training militarily than a lot of the guys that go into the military. It's a controversial claim, of course. Military school is not military service. Trump received 5 draft deferments during the Vietnam War for college, and 1 for bone spurs. That last deferment became a political flashpoint decades later. Critics questioned its legitimacy. Trump, unfazed, stood by it. But what's not up for debate is the influence Naima had on him. The command structure, the sense of hierarchy, the performance of leadership. It was a place that rewarded strength, visibility, confidence traits that Trump would carry into every room he entered for the rest of his life. And maybe that's the point. Trump didn't become who he is despite military school. He became who he is because of it. A boy sent away for discipline, who came back knowing how to weaponize authority, how to project dominance, how to look like a general, even if you never fought a war. And if uniforms were the beginning of his public face, let's flash forward to a different kind of acting. Next, we step onto a film set, not a campaign, not a courtroom, but a children's movie. That's right. Donald Trump in the Little Rascals. Because every mogul needs a moment on the big screen, especially one with a punchline. Trump's role in the Little Rascals. If you blink, you might miss it. But there he is, Donald Trump, in all his suited, smirking glory, making a cameo in the 1994 family film The Little Rascals. Yes, the remake of the 1930s kids comedy series featuring Alfalfa, Spanky, Darla, and a dog, with a spot over his eye, also features a brief, unexpected detour into the world of Manhattan real estate. Trump plays the father of Waldorf, rich, preppy, slick-haired antagonist who tries to steal Darla away from poor, love-struck Alfalfa. It's typecasting at its finest. Waldo's dad is clearly supposed to be absurdly wealthy, arrogant, and a little too proud of himself. Who better to play that role than a man who was, at the time, actively branding himself as the living embodiment of American opulence? The scene is short. Trump appears on a video call with his son, Waldo, to offer some parental encouragement. His line? "Waldo, you're the best son money can buy," delivered straight-faced. Dry, with all the warmth of a corporate acquisition. It's both a joke and a cultural snapshot. A satirical jab at materialism delivered by the guy who spent decades building a reputation around skyscrapers, luxury hotels, and putting his name on just about everything that casts a shadow. The line was written as parody, but coming from Trump, it feels almost autobiographical. At the time, Trump was everywhere in pop culture. This was his cameo phase. He wasn't yet the host of The Apprentice, or a political figure. He was the human Easter egg of the 1990s and early 2000s, showing up in sitcoms, comedies, even children's movies, playing versions of himself that always orbited the same joke: rich, smug, vaguely ridiculous. But The Little Rascals cameo stands out because of what it represents in retrospect. It's Trump distilled to a single punchline: wealth as identity, parenting as transaction, success as something you buy rather than build. It also subtly mirrors how Trump has always understood the camera. He knows how to land a line. He knows the power of a well-timed wink to the audience. Whether in boardrooms, debate stages, or, in this case, G-rated film sets, Trump leans into caricature. He plays the part, and sometimes the part plays him. To today's audiences, the scene is surreal. Watching a future president appear in a remake of a Depression-era kids' show is the kind of historical footnote that feels made up. But it happened. It's in the credits, on film, immortalized forever in a joke about parenting and pocketbooks. And it wasn't even his last bizarre screen appearance. Because next, we stay on the small screen and take a detour to Manhattan's most glamorous zip code. That's right, Sex and the City, where Carrie Bradshaw meets Couturier and Donald Trump meets a cosmopolitan cameo. Appeared in Sex and the City. Before the presidency, before the Red Hat rallies, and long before social media became his microphone, Donald Trump did what every New Yorker with name recognition and a sharp suit tried at least once in the late 90s. She appeared on Sex and the City. It was Season 2, Episode 8. Title: The Man, the Myth, the Viagra. Aired in 1999. The golden era of HBO, when Carrie Bradshaw's voiceovers echoed through every brunch and Jimmy Choo boutique. And there, for a fleeting moment, was Donald J. Trump, not as a character, but as himself. The scene takes place at a high-end Manhattan restaurant. Samantha, the ever-ambitious PR queen, is dining with an older gentleman, an affluent real estate tycoon who's clearly part of the city's power elite. They're sipping drinks, trading innuendos, when suddenly the man waves across the room. Enter Trump. He doesn't speak. He doesn't smile. He doesn't even make a gesture. He simply nods as he glides past, acknowledged with the quiet deference reserved for kings and mega-millionaires. The other character leans in and says something like, "That's Donald Trump. He's like a sculpture, like a work of art." The line is delivered with awe and a little bit of irony, because even in Sex and the City, a show obsessed with wealth, status, and New York's glittering social ecosystem, Trump is framed not as a man, but as a presence, a human monument to power, money, and the kind of cold, polished masculinity that can silence a room with a look. That cameo, short as it was, says a lot. Trump didn't need dialogue. His appearance was the point. He had already reached the level of celebrity where just being in the frame was a statement.
No need to explain who he is. No need for context.
If you lived in New York or watched television, you knew. And that's exactly how Trump wanted it. For Trump, pop culture wasn't a side hustle, it was a second language. Every cameo, every walk-on role, every name drop in shows like Sex and the City was part of the branding strategy. He inserted himself into the cultural bloodstream like a recurring motif, always just visible enough to remind you who's on top. In Sex and the City, Trump wasn't portrayed as a joke or a villain or even a man. He was a symbol of success, money, and a particular brand of untouchable New York arrogance. The kind that wears tailored suits in August and never waits for a reservation. And when you watch the episode today, knowing what comes after the political rise, the global headlines, the seismic cultural shift, it hits different. That background cameo now reads like the quiet blink of a coming storm. A reminder that Trump didn't emerge from politics, he emerged from screens. Appeared in The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Long before he was President Trump, long before campaign rallies and executive orders, he was just Donald the celebrity businessman, the punchline in Armani, and the guy who seemed to show up in every sitcom that needed a symbol of ridiculous wealth. And yes, that includes The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. It was 1994. Season 4, Episode 25. Title: For Sale by Owner. The plot? Uncle Phil and Aunt Viv are considering selling the Banks mansion. The potential buyer? Donald J. Trump complete with Melania predecessor Marla Maples in tow. The scene plays out like a perfectly wrapped 90s joke. Trump and Maples appear at the Banks' home, greeted by Carlton, who practically melts at the sight of the real estate titan. Hillary gasps. Will freaks out. Everyone loses composure. Because even back then, Trump wasn't a man, he was an event. Trump enters the room and immediately sucks up the oxygen with a line that's become unintentionally hilarious in retrospect. Will asks, "Who's the man?" And Trump answers, deadpan, "I'm the man." Laughter track. Applause. Cut to the Banks family collectively realizing that their home might be sold to him. Trump's appearance is brief but surgical. He plays himself because who else would he play? The man wasn't showing up to do Shakespeare. He came to reinforce the brand. Big suit, bigger ego, charming just enough to keep it fun, cocky just enough to keep it Trump. At the time, The Fresh Prince was one of the most beloved shows on television, and Will Smith was fast becoming a household name. Trump, meanwhile, was deep into his phase. As a New York City caricature, the mogul with real estate, casinos, and an unshakable belief in his own legend. This cameo marked the intersection of two massive 90s icons sown fresh, one frozen in ambition. And even though it was just a cameo, it carried meaning. The Trump brand in the early 90s was still aspirational. He represented a rival, the kind of person you name drop to impress people. Having him appear on Fresh Prince was like inviting Monopoly to dinner. It didn't make sense, but it made a point. Of course, watching it now feels like time travel. You're not just seeing a sitcom star and a real estate tycoon. You're seeing two future titans of pop culture and politics, Will Smith on his way to Hollywood royalty and Donald Trump on his way to the White House, detouring through every sitcom living room along the way. Because that was the Trump strategy. Show up, be seen, be everywhere, be unforgettable. And while his cameos eventually ended, the image building never stopped. Trump's involvement in boxing. Step into the ring, bright lights, roaring crowd, the smell of sweat and leather. And there, in the front row or ringside VIP section, often not far from the action, sits Donald J. Trump. Suited, stoic, and smiling like the bout is just another boardroom negotiation. For decades, Trump wasn't just a spectator of boxing, was an enthusiastic promoter, financier, and in his own way, a combatant in the business of blood sport. Trump's history with boxing dates back to the 1980s, the golden age of heavyweight titans like Mike Tyson, and where there were lights, cameras, and guaranteed chaos, Trump was never far behind. He hosted some of the biggest fights of the era at his Atlantic City casinos, particularly Trump Plaza and Trump Taj Mahal. These weren't casual bookings, they were spectacles, broadcast events, global matchups, major moneymakers. Trump saw boxing not just as entertainment, but as brand building. The ring was a stage, and he knew exactly where to position his name, literally, on the ring apron, the programs, the building, and in the background of every televised punch. One of the most notable fights held under the Trump banner? Tyson versus Spinks in 1988. Billed as once and for all, it was one of the most hyped bouts of the decade, and Trump Plaza was the host. Tyson destroyed Spinks in 91 seconds. The fight grossed tens of millions. Trump got his Kutend, his close-up. He and Mike Tyson were close for a time. Trump once called Tyson a friend and claimed he gave him business advice. Tyson stayed at Trump properties, dined at Trump's table, and played the role of pugilist in residence in Atlantic City. But as with many Trump alliances, the friendship eventually faded, and both parties moved on. Trump wasn't just a fan of heavyweight drama, he liked the pageantry, the violence, the guarantee of attention. Boxing fit perfectly into his worldview. Two men enter, one man leaves victorious, the other broken. It was the ultimate metaphor for Trump's favorite themes: competition, dominance, spectacle. He also dabbled in promotion beyond simply hosting. Trump co-promoted several fights, including cards with Don King, boxing's most infamous ringmaster. It was a partnership built on mutual flamboyance, King with his hair and flags, Trump with his suits and scowl. Together, they turned prize fighting into a glitzy Atlantic City mainstay for years. And the optics were everything. Trump courtside wasn't just Trump watching. It was Trump being seen watching, leaning forward as the punches flew, posing with boxers post-fight, offering quotes to reporters about power and strategy as if he were advising a merger instead of a middleweight. Even into the 2000s and beyond, Trump stayed adjacent to the fight game. He praised boxers like Evander Holyfield. He commented on matches and interviews. He attended title fights long after most politicians and moguls considered the sport too chaotic for their image. And when mixed martial arts exploded in popularity, Trump didn't miss that boat either. He hosted early UFC events at Trump Taj Mahal, back when no one else would touch the sport. Dana White, UFC president, has said Trump helped keep the UFC alive during its most fragile years. In return, White became a vocal Trump supporter, speaking at both the 2016 and 2020 Republican National Conventions. Trump's ties to the fight world endure. Fighters like Jorge Masvidal, Colby Covington, and even Tyson Fury have posed with him or praised him publicly. He remains a patron saint of showdowns, a fan of fists flying and fortunes on the line. Because Trump sees boxing the way he sees life. A ring, a spotlight, and a fight, you either win big or lose loud. Trump's ownership of the New Jersey Generals. Before The Apprentice, before the presidency, before even the gold-plated real estate blitzkrieg of the 90s, Donald Trump bought a football team. Not in the NFL, not in the big leagues, but in the league that wanted to be big, the USFL. The United States Football League was launched in 1983 as a springtime alternative to the NFL. It was fast, aggressive, and filled with hungry players and risk-taking owners. And among them, none was hungrier or flashier than Trump. In 1984, Trump bought the New Jersey Generals, a team already boasting one of the most explosive players in the sport, Herschel Walker, the Heisman-winning phenom with a linebacker's build and a running back's speed. Trump inherited the team from Oklahoma oilman J. Walter Duncan and instantly began doing what he does, best, making noise. Trump's entry into the USFL wasn't just a sports move, it was a spotlight move. Owning a football team meant headlines, TV deals, handshakes with athletes, glamour in the owner's box. Trump didn't just want to play the game. He wanted to own the field. Under Trump, the Generals spent big. He signed quarterback Doug Flutie, another Heisman winner, and pumped money into the roster like it was Manhattan real estate. Flash over function. Stardom over strategy. The team improved, attendance climbed, and the Generals became one of the league's top franchises. But Trump wasn't content with winning spring games. He wanted war with the NFL. Trump's grand vision was for the USFL to move its season to the fall and directly challenge the NFL on its home turf. It was a bold move and a fatal one. While other owners urged caution, Trump charged forward. He believed the USFL could force a merger. He wanted a piece of the real power, the real money. In 1986, the USFL filed an antitrust lawsuit against the NFL, accusing them of monopolizing professional football. Trump was a key voice behind the push. He even testified in court. The league hoped for a major settlement or a legal victory that would vault it into parity with the NFL. They won. Technically, the jury found the NFL guilty of violating antitrust laws, but they awarded the USFL a symbolic one in damages, trebled under antitrust law. It became $3. The league collapsed shortly after. No fall season, no merger, no more USFL. Critics and some fellow owners pointed the finger at Trump. They said he'd sacrificed the league's long-term future for a quick shot at NFL relevance, that he pushed too hard, too fast, and left a trail of bankrupt franchises in his wake. Trump, naturally, disagreed. He claimed the league was doomed before he arrived, that he brought attention, excitement, star power, that he tried to save it. But the result was the same. The USFL became a cautionary tale, and Trump's Generals disbanded, relegated to sports trivia nights and ESPN documentaries. Still, Trump didn't regret it. The ownership gave him national exposure, relationships with athletes, a place in the sports world he never really left. And in true Trump fashion, it wasn't about the league, it was about the brand. Even if the league died, he walked away more famous than when he entered. Because for Trump, it's not whether the team wins or loses, it's whether he walks off the field in front of the cameras. And if football wasn't enough, let's talk about the one space where even the White House got upstaged Trump's infamous red button on the presidential desk. Not for war, not for emergencies, but for Diet Coke. The Diet Coke button. In the Oval Office, nestled among documents, presidential pens, and one of the most recognizable desks in the world, sat a little red button. No labels, no instructions. Just a discreet candy-colored dome on a wooden box. It looked like something you'd press to launch a missile or maybe eject a press secretary. But for Donald Trump, that red button did one thing: summon a Diet Coke. Yes, really. Placed on the Resolute desk during Trump's presidency, the red button became one of the most talked-about details of his time in the White House. Not for its power, though, to be fair. Its symbolism was undeniable, but for its specificity. press it, and a butler would promptly deliver a cold glass bottle of Diet Coke on a silver tray. Presidential refreshment at the push of a button. It started as a small, strange anecdote, a White House curiosity, a piece of trivia that journalists shared with a mix of bemusement and disbelief. But then came the confirmations from aides, insiders, and even international reporters. It was real. Trump had a Diet Coke button, and he used it often. Trump reportedly drank up to a dozen Diet Cokes a day. The White House staff knew the drill. The button wasn't connected to a complex machine or any underground soda delivery system. It was a call bell. Simple, elegant, ridiculous. Someone on the other end would receive the alert, walk into the Oval Office, and hand the president his drink of choicest cold and caffeinated. To Trump, it was practical, efficient, presidential even. Why bother calling someone or getting up when a single press could bring instant gratification? To everyone else it was, well, something else. The red button quickly took on a mythological tone. Memes were made. Late-night jokes landed nightly. Some compared it to Dr. Evil's lair. Others joked it was the most Trump thing imaginable. An executive-level soda service installed in the most powerful office on earth. Even after Trump left the White House, the Diet Coke button lived on in legend. When President Joe Biden first took office, reporters noticed its absence and wrote about it like a missing artifact. The very idea that it had once existed and now didn't felt like a metaphor for the entire Trump era. Because the button wasn't about soda, it was about the performance of power, about turning even the smallest indulgence into a statement. About being that guy, the one who drinks 12 Diet Cokes a day and installs a silent summoning machine to keep them coming on demand. The button was a joke, yes, but also a symbol. One that sat right next to the presidential phone line, the nuclear codes, and the leather blotter where history is signed. It was a reminder. In Trump's White House, every detail had to reflect the man at the desk. Branded. Odd. Larger than life.